I'd like to call to order the August 11th meeting of the Clive City Council. Would the clerk please call roll?
Mayor Edwards,
Here.
council members Klein,
Here.
McCoy,
Here.
Judkins,
Here.
Weaver, here, McElhaney.
Here.
Very good. We're all here. Let's rise, if you would, and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm not aware of any additions or changes to the agenda.
Approval.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second. Motion second, approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The agenda is approved. Next, we have our citizen presentation. This is the opportunity we provide citizens to approach the council on an item that is not on the agenda. And while Pete checks to see if there's anyone online, let me just remind everyone here of the pillars that we follow. We support character counts, endeavoring at all times to promote and model the principles of trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship. In conducting our work, we expect that all participants will act in a respectful manner consistent with these principles. Pete, do we have anyone online?
For folks who are participating online, use the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you click the reactions emoji, a separate window will pop up and you can choose raise hand. For those on the phone, to raise your hand, hit *9. Your Honor, there's nobody who wants to ask a question at this time.
All right, we'll turn to the council chambers to see if there's anyone here who would like to approach the council on a matter not on the agenda. Please come forward and identify yourself for our record.
For the record, my name is Robert Greenway. That's Greenway. At the present time, I live in 417 7th Street, Menlo, Iowa. I'm going to be moving to Granger here very shortly. This is just an announcement, and Pete, you're supposed to pull me if I cross the line. Okay, got it? I'm a candidate, Democrat candidate for Dallas County Supervisor, District 1, running against Brad Golightly. I believe this is now his area. They did redistrict. I was told that Mark Hansen used to be. That's beside the point. Anyway, there are at least 2, maybe 3, might remember me. I promoted the local option sales tax referendum initiative, whatever you want to call it. And you all have been receiving substantial funds from that, okay? Which I'm very proud of. It did carry the entire, almost a miracle, the entire county. It was a miracle that it carried the unincorporated areas by 13 votes. That's kind of a history, all right? All right, you're getting one point, okay, we're done on that. That's my announcement, okay? But there's one other piece. There is a movement, another initiative to go to from three county supervisors in Dallas to 5. At the present time, there are 3 districts based on population voted at large. And we would have got it started for a sweet corn festival. Unfortunately, it takes too much time to get it to letter perfect. So, but be aware of it. It is coming. You have to get 10% of the last population vote, which is 5,600. It's not going to be fun unless the county supervisors decide to put it on the ballot. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the chamber who wishes to address the council on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing no one come forward, we'll move to consent items.
Approval.
Second. We have a motion and a second to approve consent. Further discussion? If not, will the council please vote? And will the clerk please post the vote? Our consent items are approved by a vote of 5-0. Next up, Rick.
Mayor and council, always a pleasure to introduce new employees to all of you. First one tonight is Aaron Cardwell. He's a firefighter EMT. Starting in the second half of 2021, he joined both the Clive and Johnston Grimes Fire Departments as a part-time firefighter EMT, and we were lucky enough to hire him full-time before Johnston got a hold of him. So he's got working on an AS degree in fire science from Waldorf that he expects to complete just about any day. Is that right?
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And he'll be starting paramedic class here as we get into probably 2023. So my pleasure to introduce Aaron Cardwell to you.
Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. It's a great department to work for part-time and excited that they allow me to work there full-time now. So excited to start and get to know my crew better and hopefully help them out as best as I can.
Very good. We're glad you're here.
Welcome. Thank you. And next up, we've got Brad Lundquist, who's joining us by Zoom tonight. There's Brad. Welcome, Brad. Brad joins us from Newton. He was full-time firefighter, paramedic there, and we were lucky enough to attract him in. He's also got experience with the Bondurant and Ankeny fire departments. He's got a AA degree from DMAC and a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and sociology from Iowa State. So welcome, Brad. We're glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Any Cyclone fans have any questions?
I'm not going to touch that.
Disappointed I couldn't be there tonight. Unfortunately, I think I got a parting gift from Newton. I got COVID, so wish I could be there in
That's
person, but I'm very excited to meet all you in the future. So thank you very much.
We appreciate you being safe.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Everyone's a Cyclone fan, Mayor.
Oh, thank you. I was totally unaware of that. Jeff, who do we have with you?
Well, that's a lead into our next introduction, Mayor Council. I'm pleased to be here tonight to introduce you to our new water resources engineer, Ray Tokuhitsa. Ray comes to us with some experience with RDG and HR Green, has an undergraduate degree in civil environmental engineering and a master's in water resources and hydraulics. Is an engineer in training and is a graduate of the University of Iowa. So,
But we welcome you anyway.
yes, well, my pleasure to introduce you. We're very fortunate to find Ray Tokuhitsa. Right?
Mayor, thank you for the implicit forgiveness for being an Iowa grad. Fun fact, I never actually went to a football game. I've never been in Kinnick Stadium for a football game, but I, in high school, cleaned up after them a lot as part of the marching band. So that's the experience I have in my stadium.
And what was your instrument?
Flugelhorn.
Well,
Yeah.
I was trying to pick up if there were any skills that might be helpful in other ways.
Only as a
Yeah.
only as a derivative to a battle cry for water resources, the water quality of our green belt, and being able to connect people to nature in the ways that I'd like to see.
Well, that'd be interesting, the battle cry with flugelhorn for water. I
Yeah.
can't wait to hear this.
We'll put it on TikTok. It'll be great. Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right, we'll move on to our action items. First item is a public hearing. Did we publish the appropriate public notice?
Yes, Your Honor, that was published in the Des Moines Register on July 25th, 2022.
Jim?
Thank you, Mayor. We received bids last week for some additional work on Clark Street. This is a landscaping project in the biocells that have been completed on phase 1 and phase 2 of the project. We received 3 bids. You have a tabulation in your packet. Stonecross Lawn and Landscaping was read low, the one bid under the engineer's estimate. City has a working relationship with Stonecross as they've performed mowing contracts for us in the past. So we would be recommending award to them tonight. I know Pete maybe has some pictures or some additional comments, but I'd be happy to take any questions you have at this time.
Very good. Questions for Jim?
Jim, a lot of differential on those bids, 45,000 from the first to the second, then 50, 60,000 from, why such a differential on that?
Well, there's two bid items and one's a lump sum for a large amount of plantings. So I mean, that's where you're going to see the variability on this one. As far as I'm getting a little bit out of my realm when we start talking about plants. So I guess that's where the difference would lie on this one.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Move to close the public hearing.
Second.
Motion second, further discussion?
Can we see the pictures? I would like to see what this is going to look like.
Before we close the public hearing, is there anyone in the chamber who would like to address the council on this matter?
I may ask my colleague Richard to join me up here to answer a few questions as well. We've pulled up some pictures to give you the council examples of what this will look like once the plantings initially go in, and then a little feel for what they look like when in a number of years they're grown out, and what you could expect to see during dry conditions like what we have right now. The first slide here are examples of the 5 different species of plants that will be planted throughout these cells. And the density is important to note. There are over 1,300 plants that are going into 15 different bioretention cells. So there's a lot of right away, get it looking green, get some strong sense of that this is going to be full, this is going to be verdant. Though, like all plantings, when we have dry weather, things are going to look a little bit different. Here's an example of a cell from the University of Northern Iowa campus. I pulled this as an example because, like the cells that we have on Clark Street, we have a turf edge that comes all the way down to the bottom of the cell. Some of the cells that we'll be constructing and finishing will have mulch that comes up higher up that edge, depending on what the elevations look like. But in this picture, you can see sort of that line of differentiation where the mulch and the amended soils start and where the turf reaches down to it. As part of our plan, we'll also have a steel edge border that goes around the area with the amended soils. And that will be one more visual cue for residents about where they need to mow to if they're able to, and then where they should stop so that they don't get into those plants that we don't want to get clipped up. Here's another example from UNI's campus of what a cell looks like. Now, the plantings that they have here are different than the plantings we're picking. Ours are not going to be as tall as those that you see here in the middle. The reason I provided this picture, though, was to show you what it will look like when you have your turf edge and where your plantings start when the cell has reached a more mature state. You're also going to have some of the cell, plantings of the cell that are going to stand up taller than others, so that it'll look like it's kind of peeking up out of the bottom of that cell. You'd be able to easily see it from the street level or from the sidewalk level. Dry conditions do create some challenges for these cells, but these plants are designed to be able to survive not only the very wet, but also the dry. So I went out this afternoon and took this picture. Councilwoman Judkins has mentioned this cell before. It's designed a little bit differently. You don't have the turf that comes all the way down to it. This is a parking lot edge where there's water that flows directly into the cell, though you can see the turf that's over here. I pulled it though to show you that a cell that hasn't had as much time to grow out is going to be, you're going to be able to see the mulch underneath it, even with the dense planting that we're doing. And you'll still at times be able to see some of the infrastructure that's in the cell. So here you can see the bonnet and the standpipe. So if the water ever gets that high, it has a way to start going directly back down into the storm sewer, as opposed to going through the infiltration into the soil. And then you can see the inlet structure on this cell in particular. We have a different type of inlet structure on our cells on Clark Street, but you can still see it not only at the street level, but then there's another part of it that goes down to the bottom of the cell.
Quick question. When you go back up to that first one and you talk about some of the cells we have, it seems though that many of our cells slope is different than these, right?
Yep. We do have some cells that have got a steeper slope, and none of them are just one long continuous stretch like this. There's one that might be close, but there are numbers that have, but the big difference is they have the walls in between them, because of the elevation changes that we have coming down on,
There's one that
Clark Street.
doesn't. I just drove through it today. There was-
right, the one that's by Paul's house is a
Yeah.
long skinny one like that as well. Yep. So in the areas where we have slopes that are too steep, we're going to need to make some choices. This work that needs to be done before any plantings go in, as our public works and park teams are going to be going out with the vac truck. They're going to suck out the existing mulch that's in it now and add more amended soil to the bottom of those cells, which is going to raise the bottom and create that new level that we're going to be planting in. I think that's going to help with some of the elevation challenges we have, but not all of them. We wanted to see what they look like fully constructed, but we fully understand as we've gone through this process and kind of navigated from what was designed to what was built to now what we actually have to manage. We expect that we're going to continue to need to keep tailoring and working on those as well. There could be additional infrastructure that we need to put in place, whether it's a small wall in certain places so that we create something that can actually be managed long-term.
Well, I'm happy you said all that, right? It's because at some of those points when you drive it, I think, wow, there's no way I could mow that today, let alone on a good day, health-wise, right?
Mhm.
And so we've got to be a little bit open to changes and listening and having the feedback. So continuing that dialogue with the residents, not this year, but in the next 2 to 3 years when that matures a bit.
Mhm.
Because I do see a lot of issues with that line, the grass line to the vegetation, and
Mhm.
what we're planting, but
Mhm.
we're in it now and let's try it and see what,
That's right.
See how it goes. It's going to be a great project. It's just going to be, what is this next 3 to 5 years going to look like?
That's right.
To Michael's point, is there any planned, is there any planned community outreach or meetings already kind of in process or in the pipe, so to speak?
Right. So it's been some time since we brought the entire neighborhood back together. We've been trying to focus specifically on households that have a tree or one of these cells immediately in front of them. I think that's the group we should prioritize with ongoing outreach, especially as they are getting ready to see the vac truck come in, pull out the mulch, and then thereafter get the new plants going into the cells. When we go through with the vac truck, we're also going to be looking for places where if we can tell already where the sod is dead, identify those spots because we know we're going to have to come back and make those, put down new sod in those places. But fortunately, after talking to Richard, we think that most of the sod that's out there is just dormant. And we need some good weather and also some just good maintenance work to get it established. So we're ready to keep it stabilized through the fall and the winter, and we're ready for a good spring.
Pete, what does this project's long-term maintenance look like from the city and time and later expense? What does that look like moving down the road?
Yeah, maintenance is the right word for it. Like all infrastructure, this infrastructure is going to take maintenance. So the plan right now is that it will be maintained like a number of other green infrastructure assets we have by our parks department. But this is new. And so exactly what it's going to take in terms of person hours, how many times we're going to be able to get through in the course of a season while we have to manage other responsibilities. That's something that we will be determining as we get into the actual management activity.
Councilmember, I'll add to that too, is as we talked about in the budget process this year, forming up that natural resources team within the Parks Department. We got that one new position that'll be starting January 1, and then I'll be coming back to you with a request for one more position to start January 1 next year, 2024. And that is to give Richard the resources to be able to form up that natural resources team so they can maintain infrastructure like this, pond maintenance, other stormwater maintenance. So we're really trying to up our game, knowing that just like our regular infrastructure, to Pete's point, that these are going to require maintenance, just a different kind of maintenance, more plant maintenance and de-weeding and staying on top of that versus just kind of the normal gray infrastructure maintenance that we're used to. And so that's a big part of putting those resources in place to support these kinds of best management practices throughout the community.
Well, and we made some commitments to these residents. And so
Sure.
we have to keep those commitments that we are going to maintain this, and it's not going to become an eyesore for them long term, right? But along the same lines as Mike and Shrikant, with respect to the outreach, and you know as well as I do, there are a number of these residents who were not happy. Whether they should have known about it or not, they felt blindsided, what have you. Have we reached out to them to show them what this is going to look like so that they're not surprised by when this stuff gets planted that, well, I didn't want that in my front yard. You know what I mean?
Yep. So in the multiple years of outreach, we consistently showed examples of the plants that we were going to want to put into these cells. And these 5 were always part of that mix.
So, but specific to the homes that have this in front of their house, those folks, I mean, I know we did general neighborhood meetings where they had an opportunity to come.
Right.
But those specific, because there's only, a finite number of these houses, have they all seen this?
So Jim and Tony have, as people have had issues that have questions that have come up, have been in extremely frequent conversation. I think it's wise for us in this next step, before the next round of sort of flurry of activity that happens, to go specifically to folks with a mailing and an invitation to join us in person to show them specifically these pictures.
Those specific homes that are directly impacted by that, I would agree with that.
Now, I will say that after many years of doing this now, there are some folks who aren't going to trust until we've actually earned it and shown them that we can do it. And with those, I would just ask that they give us a chance to perform. And there have been moments when folks have been going through this change and have felt some strong frustration. I do feel like, though, the city has kept its commitment to listening and to continuing to engage. We've not shut the door on any of those conversations, even when folks get frustrated, and have continued to try and meet them where they're at the very least, to give them accurate information. It's going to take some time, though, for others to come around to trusting us that we're going to be able to do this maintenance long term.
So for a lot of these, they, like the next slide is just the one wide open with the storm drain. But in ours, like you said, we've got a number of them that have kind of the stone wall.
Yes.
In them. Does that impact how any of this is done with respect to the plantings, or does it just grow over it, or how does that work?
There's going to be, I think, some discretion that we're going to have to give our landscaping partners on this to figure out how they best fit the number of plants into those cells and to the right spots on those cells as well. The planting spec that we put out there with the contract has an example cell in it that shows sort of a narrower end where the sort of the discharge, the low end of the cell is at, and then a higher end as well. The mix in general shows a lot of density of the plants, with some of the taller plants toward the center of the cell. I think it's some of the shorter ones toward the edges. That's how I've read it, not as a landscape architect. But it's going to look a little bit different each place that we plant. And you will be able to see through many parts of the year where those walls are at. These are plants that die back in the fall. That means that we're going to have grasses that, if we'd like, they can stand up all through the winter. I think that's a best practice from both good healthy habitat and also protecting the plants. But then in the spring, they would go, and similar to some of the areas we have right now, they'd be cut back with that dry material. And when they are, you'll be able to see those walls in the cells.
One more thing, just not to belabor the mowing point, but I think when you do that outreach to the folks that are, that have the houses adjacent to these, it'd be good to have some thoughts in mind as to what their expectations are, what we're going to expect from them and what they can expect from us.
Right. So the mowing point has been a consistent question that's come up over multiple years of engagement. And I know that Jim and Tony have worked very specifically with some residents who have had a tough time with mowing. And we've told them to this point, let's see what the bottom looks like once we get it elevated to the right level, and then see what we've got in front of us to mow as well. I think that this long-term, depending on each household that we're working with, it may be a case-by-case basis how we choose to manage it. There may be some folks where we just say, all right, we're going to tolerate some longer turf grass that grows up alongside the edge of this bioretention cell, knowing that it's a real burden on some people to be able to mow it. But for a lot of other folks, I think you're going to be able to drop that push mower down there and then pull it back up. But I would recommend that let's see what we're dealing with before we start committing ourselves to a different maintenance strategy for the turf around the cells.
Pete, that's smart. I think we need to be flexible with this. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. We have to realize that, each one of these is going to have its own needs right there. But one thing that's important is the communication aspect. People don't like surprises, and making sure we've got those expectations very clear up front from both the city and the residents' perspective. So that we have a clear understanding once we work our way through this, so that nobody has any surprises.
Right. I think the first experience people will have with it this fall, if we get good growing conditions, is, wow, that's a nice change. Instead of looking at just a mulch-filled bottom or some weeds popping up, that they're going to start to see green at the bottom of those cells, and a lot of it. I think that's going to be a positive experience. I think anybody who's, purchased a home or built a new home or redone a yard, when you start to see the green things go in there, it feels like you're getting closer to good. So we're going to take hopefully some goodwill there and build upon it.
Other questions for Pete? Again, we've had a motion and a second to
I
close
do
the
have
public hearing.
just a comment, Your Honor.
Susan?
And that would just be that as much of a leader as Clive has been in flood mitigation efforts, we haven't led on this. And there are many examples to direct people to go look at throughout the metro. And one of the things I'm really happy about that the city has done is kind of looking to experience of a community like Coralville, kind of led in this effort, and they have multiple bioretention cells. What they learned is to use plants that people recognize, and you would recognize those plants that he was showing us. They're in lots of gardens. That's helpful, that people know that's not a weed, that's something very desirable. So I really think the city has done a great job with that. And the advice to just ask people to give it a little bit of time for the plants to grow. Within a few years, we'll be as thrilled with this as other communities are with their efforts. So, but really good questions.
Thanks, Susan. Any other comments, questions? Again, we have had a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Any further discussion? If not, would the council please vote on closing the public hearing? And would the clerk please post that vote? The public hearing is closed by a vote of 5-0.
I'll move a resolution approving plans and specs.
Second.
Motion is second to approve plans and specs. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote? That passes by a vote of 5-0.
Move to receive the bids.
Second.
Motion to receive the bids. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote? Bids are received by a vote of 5-0.
I'll move a resolution awarding the contract to Stonecrest Lawn and Lawnscape for $86,285.
Further discussion?
I just say, Mr. Mayor, that good work on staff with, this was a difficult project, and getting it out the first time was a tough one on the landscaping piece and tough timing, and it now has come back favorable. And so time will tell, but good work on that, sticking with it.
Further comment? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And will the clerk please post that vote? And that passes by a vote of 5-0. We're looking forward to that. Next, we'll take a look at wastewater. Jeff.
Mayor Council, as you know, we utilize the Water Reclamation Authority, WRA, to treat our sanitary sewer waste. As part of that, we have an agreement with them to adhere closely to their industrial waste and haulers agreements and what they have for their ordinances and codes down there. They've looked, just recently did a rate study. And as part of that rate study, they looked at how they were charging for different things and are in the process of changing their method of charging for surcharges and rates as part of it. You will see they, excuse me here. As part of that, it includes adding the city of Grimes. The main part of this change is looking at how they charge for surcharges is probably the biggest part of it. We have two users, industrial users here in the city of Clive. That is Love's Truck Stop over here and the Winter Group, of which neither are big organic users, which is where most of the charges that are going to come in based on this rate code change is going to happen. Um, Again, as we look at it, the changes are minor. I highlighted them quickly there, but it's some edits. It's the addition of Grimes, and then it gets into that charging for some of the organics, the total suspended solids, the different things along those lines. So we're in the process of taking a look at upgrade or adjusting our ordinance, changing our ordinance to kind of conform with what they're proposing. Their proposal is that this will go into effect on October 1st. We would have 3 readings at the current schedule. We would have ours final approval at our first meeting in September. Currently, we have a few changes left to do in the surcharge schedule, some references and things like that we will get cleaned up prior to the 3rd reading. The City Council or Attorney Christina has been working on that, and we'll finish that up as we get a little bit closer. With that, I'll open up to questions. Again, the 2 users in the city of Clive are minorly impacted. I think the biggest thing that comes out of it is that they used to have a $50 charge when they went to the food places to do an inspection. They've completely eliminated that fee, so that when they go to the food establishments, it's included in their permit, so there's no additional charge for that. And then one other thing in here that I probably should mention is that some of the people did self-cleaning of their grease traps, and there was 15 users in the whole metro area that were doing that. They were having troubles with that, so they've eliminated that as an option, and you don't have to hire someone to do that. So that kind of highlights the major changes as part of this. Again, I'll be glad to answer any questions about this. Or
Yes, go ahead.
Jeff, from a staff perspective, does any of these changes or fee structures concern you or?
No, again, the rate study, and a copy of it is in there, and it's quite a bit of information, was pretty specific on the way they should be charging it. Instead of everyone paying for it, charge the people that are contributing the specific waste, which is a good idea. Getting rid of the inspection fee, I think, is a good thing. I'm going to come out and inspect you, and then I'm going to tell you what you need to do and you're going to pay me to do that. Let's just include it as part of the permit fee. I do like that as a way to approach it. And but no, the changes themselves, I think, are very fair, and is probably a better way to do it than what we were doing.
The self-cleaning option.
Anything from your side?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask the loss of the self-cleaning option that's going to affect the 15, sounds like 15 folks. Is there any details on what exactly was going wrong before as to why they removed that option?
Not a lot of detail, but typically what happens is that it's cleaned not the way it should be cleaned. We skim off the top. Our tank is full, so we take a little off the top. We don't actually clean it all the way out, and the maintenance gets neglected and falling behind. I would assume it's something like that just wasn't getting done right, and that they were constantly coming back up with some issues, but I can get those specifics if you want, but I don't have them. Right
in the packet, I read where they'd usually only have 1 or 2 employees at each place that was trained, and then half the time that person would leave, and so they really didn't have anyone trained.
We had a situation with one of the Clive restaurants as well. It seems like not too terribly long ago with some grease trap issues. So I think standardization, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, we actually had a couple here recently. So,
So I do have just a quick question for our WRA rep. I know this is nominal impact to us and our businesses, but there's a lot of businesses around the metro that are impacted by this, and it's not necessarily a nominal impact financially to them. I'm assuming you guys had a lot of debate about this. What is your general impression of these changes?
We did, and you look at some of the users like Metro Waste Authority, it's 22% increase, right? Who already spends 800 to 900,000 on water treatment. But if you look at the rate system that was in the past, it was so outdated and hadn't been updated for a decade. As you can assume that with Gatto on the board, the restaurant side was well vetted
Sure.
and debated,
right?
And he was very satisfied at the end, and actually pushed for the elimination of the self-cleaning. Not pushed for it, but understood the need for that self-cleaning piece, because not only would they do that, but you didn't know where it was going to go, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't a licensed individual coming out and cleaning and sucking it out and taking it to wherever.
Right.
Right. So we didn't really hear any industry pushback from that.
Okay, thanks.
Further questions? If not, we're looking.
Move
for the-
that ordinance number 1125, having been considered by the council, be voted on for passage prior to its final adoption.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Ted. Further discussion? If not, would the council please vote first reading? And will clerk please post that vote? First reading passes by a vote of 5-0. Thank you, Jeff. Amanda.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, very excited to present to you the site plan and preliminary plat for the Emerald Isle Townhomes for your approval. As you all know, this is a project the city staff has been working with the developer on for, I think, 2 years now. It's been a very challenging site with a lot of utility conflicts and other issues over here that we feel have been addressed. You will be seeing a construction drawing submittal for the plan and profile details for the final utility connections on a later council consent agenda for approval, which is pretty typical with these projects. Those come later for your approval. So can I get the doc cam, please? Can we zoom out slightly? So what you're seeing before you tonight is consistent with the master concept development plan that was presented through the rezoning process. We've just finished working through those site grading and stormwater challenges that we were still dealing with at that time. So the property is just a little over 4 acres and will be developed with 41 townhome units. You can also see there is the extension of Sheridan up here to the north. That is more acting as a shared kind of commercial driveway frontage road than it is a true public street, as it will have a transition in this area that will continue on with the gravel drive that goes back to serve the existing cell tower and the Des Moines Waterworks facility. It is possible with future development to the east here that road could be extended and improved, but that wouldn't necessarily be a requirement for future development, depending on the access and routing for those specific properties in the future. The Emerald Isle Drive improvements, consistent with the zoning change and development agreement that we had worked through, will be completed by the city at a future time. That was the financial assistance that council had agreed to get this project to be a reality with some of the other site restrictions and considerations that we had there. Stormwater, as we had talked about quite a bit through the rezoning process, is going to be handled in a few different ways. We do have some bioretention located on the site. They are, of course, going to be handling their detention as well. We talked quite a bit about this north drainage way, and that will provide a small portion of the detention requirement and the water quality volume requirement. And then off-site, here's the corner of the site. So just up here behind the cell tower is an existing regional dry basin. That is going to be improved off to the west of the basin that's existing with a new wet detention basin that will provide the stormwater management needs for detention for this property, as well as picking up some additional capacity that could be used to serve some of the other future development in the area that we're anticipating.
The development will be doing that improvement along with
Yes.
the project at the same time.
Yes, that is going to be completed by the developer. Don't know if we can kind of zoom in. Oh, no, I have the big sheet, sorry. For this north drainage way area, I know there was a lot of conversation about that in consideration with the design. You can see they are keeping that natural meander for the kind of creek flow area. Here is a side profile of it that shows you more what to expect with the townhome unit put in here. There are some grasses and ornamental plantings, as well as a block wall that is going to be this king's outcropping style here. That should be a nice aesthetic enhancement along that space.
Weaver stone.
I like that.
Good.
Nice.
And then there is space then to allow for some tree plantings along that 8-foot sidewalk recreation trail extension. With fitting the road in with the existing water infrastructure and maintaining that creek channel, we weren't able to get the kind of curvilinear trail that we see typically, but we think this is a good solution here and will be an aesthetic enhancement, certainly. There's also some spots called out here for park bench. And then there is the opportunity in the future for the city to continue extension of the trail that's being put in here, ultimately northeast and then to the Stonegate Park that is just a little northeast of here. So that would be the long-term plan with future development or city projects in the area to get that connection to the park there.
Has there been any discussion about like a playground, or especially with like Richard was presenting on some of those like more natural looking playgrounds even, right? Has there been any discussion with the developer about that or any plans?
Yeah, so Stonegate Park, as I was saying, it's actually just right over here. So it's fairly close to this development. So that is a traditional park with a playground that'll be fairly accessible at the point that that full trail connection is made. To get to that today, you would just have to walk up to the corner here and then over across the street. So it's a little bit of a walk, but it would certainly be something people could do a walk for, and that pedestrian infrastructure will be in place that would allow someone to take the sidewalk that way, north and then east to get to the park.
Do we have a timeline on that future trail connection over there?
We don't have a specific timeline on the future trail connection over there. That is city property. That is the routing of that future trail. So we could certainly prioritize that through your strategic planning and budgeting processes if that was something you wanted to see come online quickly. But then in the interim, we do have the existing sidewalk. And of course, the sidewalk on this site will be installed with this project. So they would be able to get over to the park that way.
Further questions or comments? Otherwise, we just need to approve the site.
Move approval.
Sure.
A motion and a second to approve the site plan and preliminary plat. Further discussion? Seeing none, would the council please vote? And would the clerk please post that vote? And that passes by a vote of 5-0. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you.
Next, we've got discussion items, starting with the Hickman interchange planning.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'll get the presentation set up here for Nate from Snyder and Associates to get started and give the council an update on this is part of their charge that was included in their scope of services on this corridor management kind of planning effort that's been taking place over the last year between the cities of Clive, Urbandale, and the Iowa DOT to really start to plan for this massive transportation project that'll be coming at us here in the next 3 to 4 years of completely reconstructing the Hickman interchange at the interstate. And then what are some opportunities that the cities want to look at in terms of pedestrian enhancements, aesthetic enhancements, connectivity, stormwater management, which as we've talked about earlier tonight is very important to our community, ways that we can really make this stand apart. And then on the end of that, kind of starting to look at what are some funding opportunities, both at the federal and state level, and then between the two cities to make that happen. And this is going to be kind of our 150-year shot to do this right. And so the council had prioritized in your previous strategic planning efforts to let's get ahead of this, Matt. Let's make sure that staff's getting engaged on this early on. And this is kind of the fruits of that effort. Now, I will say that this presentation isn't the end point by any means, that there is still some next steps that we'll want to talk about between the two cities of chasing grant dollars, what that looks like. The design will be incorporated with what the DOT is doing. They have a public information meeting that they just set the date for the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, that they will kind of be unveiling this whole project to the communities and the public at large. And Nate will get a little bit into that tonight, but this is really that kind of one checkpoint of many to come for a substantial project that basically takes through 2028, probably 2029.
Well, we hope for 2028, yes.
Yeah, hope for
But-
2028 to be completed, but really we'll call it the significant effort really starting in 2026, maybe some in 2025. So, but I'll
Couple
let
years
you-
before that. but yes.
I'll let you kind of walk through the time frame, but really the focus tonight is to kind of lead you through the different elements of the corridor planning work that was done, and then the many next steps before us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nate, and he's got his crew here to lead you through it.
Well, thank you, Matt. I am Nathan Carhoff with Center Associates. I'm the project manager for the 3580 and Hickman Road interchange reconstruction. I do have a couple colleagues with me tonight. I'll let them introduce themselves as we hand off the different portions of the presentation. And I do ask if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation, please feel free to state those and we can address them at that time instead of a kind of a Q&A at the end.
I thought maybe you started the project tonight, right before this council meeting.
That was a disabled vehicle just south of Douglas.
100th Street.
Before we get into corridor planning efforts, though, I do want to take a moment to give an overview of the overall project. It does include reconstruction of the interchange from its current form, which is a standard diamond interchange. It'll be reconstructed to a diverging diamond interchange. If you're not familiar with that term, if you've traveled out to Waukee recently, the I-80 and Grand Prairie Parkway interchange is a divergent diamond, as well as a recently opened one in Ankeny at I-35 and First Street.
Hey, why the change to a diverging diamond? I think we're all
Yeah.
familiar with that. What's the key driver on that?
Efficiency. It, with the amount of traffic involved on the interstate and on Hickman Road, a divergent diamond presents the most efficient form of interchange.
I think only to engineers. Yeah. Because to drivers, it makes zero sense, but on paper, I bet it's brilliant.
I would also add it is a safety. There's a huge safety consideration, and particularly with this interchange,
As
with
it
the number of
creates a safety-
accidents we've had with the semis crossing traffic, this eliminates those crossing movements.
It does improve safety quite a bit. So
I'm not sure I see that. Like, it's very, to me, it looks very easy. And I've seen cars do this in Waukee. They start going down the wrong path.
there has been issues with that, especially at the Grand Prairie Parkway and I-80 exit. As part of the planning process, we are looking at improving on the design to help eliminate those sorts of wrong way directional issues.
A signage problem? I mean, there's a lot of ways to deal with that.
Signage, addition of either hardscaping or landscaping to help point the travelers in the right direction as where they should be going. Pavement markings and as well as different types of signal heads on the traffic signals are also being talked about and discussed in these initial planning efforts.
It's a big change for the residents here. They haven't seen one of these and we all know the Grand Prairie Parkway, there's, been issues over the years with that. So.
Right.
Once you get used to it, it's not.
I agree.
We did.
Adapt just like the roundabouts.
Yeah, exactly.
Close my eyes and floor it.
It's fine.
A study was completed prior to preliminary design. It's called an interchange justification report, and that was approved by the Federal Highway. That we did look at all different types of interchanges, including flyover ramps, partial park lows. The divergent diamond ends up being the most efficient and safest interchange style.
Even compared to like the flyover ramp that would isolate that traffic, especially like that semi traffic that you were
Yeah.
talking about.
So the flyover ramp was looked at and is very much cost prohibitive. For example, it's northbound to westbound, there would have to be a large amount of newly developed commercial real estate that would have to be purchased in order to put that ramp in, which really kind of prices that option out of the mix.
So, but to clarify, that was one of the key considerations that took that one off the table. And
Correct. Cost.
Building
Price.
Yeah.
would have been part of that acquisition, would have been this building probably. To go north and to go west to flyover.
Yes, most likely.
Yeah, it's most likely.
That and the better part of Range Golf and Grill, Jimmy John's, these developments here in this kind of quadrant right here. With that, there are capacity improvements along with the actual interchange reconstruction. So there will be additional lanes, widening and reconstruction on the interstate from University to Douglas. Hickman Road itself will be widened and reconstructed. Generally speaking, from the Lifetime Fitness / Love's entrance to just past 111th Street. And then there's also some improvements to the intersections at the Love's Lifetime entrance as well as at 111th. So tonight we do want to talk about the corridor planning efforts that have taken place over the last several months. We have been working with the City of Clive and City of Urbandale staff on a periodic basis to look at land use planning, access management, bicycle and pedestrian accommodation, stormwater management, and of course, funding strategy for those improvements. I want to talk first about land use planning. So throughout the design life of this project, there is a likelihood that there could be some land use changes, and identification of those early on will help inform the design. And we wanted to take a look at the corridor in general. Early on in our discussions, it was clear that the majority of the corridor is really not likely to have a wholesale change in land use, with the northeast quadrant being taken up largely by Living History Farms and the new commercial development in that corner. The northwest and southeast quadrants are pretty much fully built out as commercial. However, the southwest quadrant, south of Hickman from 128th to the interstate was identified as an area of focus as its potential for redevelopment. Taking into account the floodplain and floodway of Walnut Creek, as well as required setbacks, that area represents 56 acres of a developable area. And the team put together a number of scenarios for redevelopment, including residential and commercial or a mix of the two. Ultimately landing on the entire area being redeveloped as high density commercial. This represents the highest and best use of the land, as well as representing kind of the worst case scenario for future traffic generation. What we do at the interchange now, we don't want to have be hindered, or don't want that to hinder future development in the area. To give you an idea of that traffic, the current site, including the Loves and Menards area, generates about 6,000 cars per day. If it were to fully redevelop into high density commercial, we're projecting that to be over 27,000 vehicles per day.
Can I ask a quick dumb question? Have Loves and or Menards given us an indication that they're looking to move and that's why we're thinking that we can redevelop this, or like I've not heard that before?
No, they haven't given us an indication at this point, but we wanted to make sure if there's a kind of a 50-year decision being made on road infrastructure, that the access management and the traffic management can withstand the potential for future development. You already have obviously a significant retail with Menards. If anything were to change with Loves or the vacant properties to the west, we wanted to make sure that from an access management standpoint and a traffic generation standpoint, that we're not creating a new issue if 20 years down the road there's a significant redevelopment opportunity. So we're really looking at a kind of a 40 to 50 year window here, and so we wanted to make sure that we're accounting for that.
I have a question related to that. With that in mind, are we giving up on any idea that we might connect with 118th from Hickman to University? Because that's been part of our economic development discussion in the past, and I don't see a provision for that.
That is definitely wasn't in this, at least the scope of what they were looking at related to the interchange. I would say that there's no kind of give up to that. That's definitely something that can be considered. I think the big question for the council will be is whether or not you want to put a bridge and a crossing through the greenbelt, and whether that would, this development here would necessitate that. It would be more of a question on the south side of Walnut Creek and the business park area of whether or not that would trigger the desire to have that additional north-south connection. So that could still definitely be in play, but it isn't necessarily something that they scoped in with their work.
I just think if we're talking 50 years, we should at least make sure it's clear that that's something we're going to continue to evaluate as a community.
And we would expect if there was a desire to have that crossing, that it would line up with the existing traffic signal at Menards. Because that alignment in terms of spacing away from the interstate would probably make the most sense. So this doesn't necessarily preclude from a future consideration of that.
We didn't specifically look at that, but nothing that we did would prevent any of that from happening. And as just a general note, if you did have connectivity to the south, that would just improve the traffic on Hickman. So we're looking at more of a kind of a worst case scenario here. DOT, City of Clive and Urbandale do have an access management, an agreement in place that goes from the interstate west to Alice's Road. We use the potential redevelopment and those traffic projections to look at that agreement and make some recommendations. Focusing on our area here that we just talked about, the current restricted access at the, I guess that's the Walnut Creek United Methodist Church here. In the future, if this area were to redevelop, that would need to be converted to a full signalized intersection and able to handle the traffic. So these exhibits have been developed for the cities and the DOT to kind of update and renegotiate that access management plan.
And that would be a next step coming out of this. Again, don't need to get into the details of that, but that is from the Clive's perspective, we want that opportunity for a future signal fully memorialized in the agreement, because we're going to be the ones that need it for development. It's not necessarily going to be the Urbandale side. And then we've communicated that to them. They've of course communicated to us, as I've indicated to council, of a future desire of a traffic signal at Country Club Boulevard and Hickman Road. So hence the word negotiation as a part of some of these considerations. So, but this is a next step that isn't necessarily on Snyder's plate. This is between the cities and the DOT to then look at these changes, understand what are the performance expectations with some of these, at what point does it trigger these things to happen, that we need to update that agreement. And that'll be a next step that, again, you'll hear this a lot from me tonight on this particular item, but we want to make sure we're outlining some of these next steps as you all head into strategic planning next week, because there's going to be action items that we will want you to all to consider that will come out of what you'll see here tonight.
If nothing else on the land use or access management, I'd like to move on to the second topic tonight, which is the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as they kind of go hand in hand with aesthetics, landscaping, and gateway features. So currently in the corridor, there are no pedestrian accommodations on Hickman Road, in our project area anyway. So reconstruction of the interstate at the interchange does present an opportunity to build those facilities. A typical pedestrian accommodation would include an at-grade facility, and that's what's kind of shown here. We use this as kind of our base option. That includes at-grade facilities, and typically in a DDI, as you transverse through that interchange, you'll be cross over to the center. There'll be a protected area in the middle of the DDI, and then you cross traffic and go back out to the exterior. From using this as a base, several options were developed, looking at a grade separated facility to enhance the safety and the comfort of the users of the facilities. What you see here is kind of the culmination of those efforts. The preferred concept is to provide a 10-foot wide trail on the north side of Hickman Road. Hopefully you can see my mouse okay. Kind of moving west east of the corridor, starting at the Lifetime Fitness entrance. That'll be kind of your standard at-grade facility. As you move easterly, the grade will rise in elevation and end up crossing over the southbound off-ramp through a pedestrian bridge. From that point, the grade lowers to get underneath the interstate through a pedestrian tunnel. Again, rising up and crossing over the northbound on-ramp with a very similar pedestrian bridge. And from that location, it gradually comes back down in elevation to an at-grade facility at 111th Street. Similarly, with Hickman Road, we looked at separated facilities for that. The preferred concept is to cross underneath Hickman Road at a pedestrian underpass at this location, which is a couple hundred feet east of the Lifetime Fitness entrance, or just south of, I believe this building is Range Golf and Grill here. From this point, a 10-foot wide trail would connect to the Clive existing Greenbelt Trail via the southbound on-ramp DOT right away, kind of traveling in that corridor. I'd ask Tim to come up and present some of the aesthetics, landscaping, and gateway features that are associated with the pedestrian improvements as well as the interchange.
Good evening. I'm Tim West, a landscape architect over at Snyder and Associates. We've been working on an aesthetic package for making the interchange area a little bit more accommodating visually. And so I'd like to walk through some of those improvement concepts with you today. Hickman represents a pretty large transportation gateway into two communities, Clive and Urbandale, and sometimes that poses some problems for designing a theme to try to make sure that we can relate to both communities as we are establishing the look and feel of this entrance into either community. This is the final version of the master plan or concept plan. I'd like to step through a few of the initial processes through our design and also focus in on a couple of the main improvements for the aesthetic concept. These boards represent some of the early work that we did on establishing information that we could use to start to pull together different themes to relate to both communities. The top row more or less shows some of the materials and colors, textures that Clive or Urbandale may incorporate in some of their already existing gateway features, as well as looking at some other communities and see what they're doing and present some of these options to the design committee for further review. The middle row, we started to take a look at some inspirational photos and precedent photos to talk about what other communities are doing for some whimsical or public art type of enhancements that could go with this interchange, as well as reviewing some of your existing planning documents to make sure we were taking into account anything that was currently underway, whether it was promotional from a growth or a recreational type of enhancement through this area, or if it was something that might be interesting for us to make sure we play a theme off of. We also took a look at some mini themes, if you will. What would it look like if we captured a historically important aspect of the corridor, such as the Grand Army of the Republic Highway there on Highway 6, that middle one on the top. We looked at whether there would be some interesting aspects to any type of natural type of processes or promotion of the Monarch Flyway, things like that. Also took a look at landforms on the bottom couple of rows. What is this new interchange going to offer for opportunities where we can show off some enhancements or some aesthetics? We're going to have some new retaining walls and some grade separation areas that we can use for promoting some of those colors, textures, materials. What are the landforms patterns that we'd like to incorporate? And a recurring theme started to come out of the Walnut Creek corridor, which passes just south of here and parallel to Hickman Road. So you can see there's some initial themes that are more creek or flowing from a natural development standpoint. We developed three concepts and started to take a look at different aspects with these. And the one on the left is more of a natural pathway theme, where we really focused on the at-grade pedestrian route that went through the center of the interchange, and started to focus on the way the pedestrian would interact through that area. So you can kind of see there's some trails and things that are associated with going through this center median. Those don't take advantage in this concept of any types of flyovers or larger bridges or higher bridges that would go over different parts of the interchange. We started to introduce some decorative lighting, which was, these were internally lit and had an artistic capability or artistic type of feature to them. And we also introduced this imprint of a design theme based on the multi-leaflet of the walnut tree. And you'll see that this starts to gain momentum through our design concepts and with the committee as a symbol for the Walnut Creek corridor. The middle one was more of a rippling ribbon theme, which had some more monolithic landforms and features that were in the center islands. No pedestrians would be in that longitudinal space between the roadways. And we started to take a little closer look at some of the bridge work and what would we do with some of these MSE panels that are associated with the underpass and some of the retaining walls. And then a third concept, which was based more on some natural celebration of the natural corridor to the south, the Walnut Creek corridor. And you can see this one's a little bit more naturalized with some themes that come off of the rippling water through the Walnut Creek area or the watershed. We also started to incorporate some different types of entrances into these different overpass or underpass situations where pedestrians, we would have an opportunity to maybe focus on some texture and color changes where we normally don't do that for the motorist as they come through. We focus more on larger types of enhancements because they're not able to pay attention or get close enough to those to really make that detail worthwhile. So we kind of settled in on the main master plan here for our preliminary design. You can see that it was really a momentum into the natural transitions, looking at native plantings, native landforms. What does it feel like to go down into the Walnut Creek corridor? So we had some waving type of action in the colored concrete that goes underneath the overpass, but really celebrating kind of the lightness into this darker underpass and then back into the light. But a lot of the focus was on more native plantings and larger landforms such as berming, and then some more monolithic, taller types of decorative columns. A little bit of detail on those. The upper photo on the left might be some larger rippling current type of designs that would be on the panels underneath the overpass, kind of lead you through and follow you through as a motorist underneath that area, contrasted with the walnut leaf pattern that would be incorporated near more of the pedestrian or bicycle areas. It could be also incorporated in some of the retaining walls that would be adjacent. The columns on the left-hand side, the top image shows that symbol of the multi-leaf walnut, the walnut tree leaflet, and kind of hearkening back or throwing out a little bit of a nod to that Walnut Creek corridor without getting too literal on the creek. An alternate could be maybe incorporating more of a texture or an internal lit framework that might provide some shadow and light interest in that column as well. On the right-hand side is more exploration of what do the overpasses or underpasses look like and what type of mini gateway or entrance features could we incorporate in there. Still keeping with the themes of the natural colors, the natural limestone, the Corten steel or the darker red color that is prolific throughout the gateways that you already have through both communities, and kind of replicating some of those man-made features into those colors.
I have a question on the pedestrian bridge. How high up are those planned to be above the roadway, and like what's kind of the grade change that's going to be required to get up onto there, right? To get onto the bridge?
That's a good question for Nate.
Come up.
So I'll kind of zoom in on this image here. Kind of shows it best. From the surface of the roadway underneath to the bottom of the beam, that'll be 17 feet of clearance. We are proposing kind of a style of truss bridge that minimizes that substructure, but you're still going to be around about 20 feet of elevation from the surface of the trail to the surface of the roadway. That grade will be made up with retaining walls on each side, shown here in the gray. These 3 retaining walls that I just kind of highlighted are necessary for the grade separation for the bridges. This wall here that traverses quite a ways up the ramp, that's actually needed for the roadway itself. So we're taking advantage of that necessary wall for the roadway construction to also make up that grade for the bridge itself.
Trail, if I remember, Nate, doesn't exceed 5%.
No, we're about 4.7% is our highest. So it's fully ADA compliant through the corridor, both east-west on Hickman and north-south down to the Greenbelt.
This sheet also contains some color palette, material palettes kind of in the middle. And although we haven't picked out plant material specific to this, those will be in the next steps. This is more of a preliminary design master plan that we're utilizing to kind of show what types of treatments can be possible. And we've associated some pricing to this as well, as you'll see a little bit later in the presentation. There's no questions on the aesthetics. I'd like to introduce Dave to talk a little bit about the stormwater enhancements.
Oh. Yeah, keep going forward, Dave. There we go.
There we go.
One more.
Okay, I'm Dave Mulholland with Snyder Associates, and I'm going to talk about stormwater treatment for the interchange project. And first of all, the intent of the stormwater treatment is to reduce pollutants and improve stormwater quality through infiltration and reduce downstream erosion. And for this project, we followed the Clive post-construction stormwater management ordinances. And there's 2 components that we're looking at or addressing. One is the quality, and that's through infiltration practices, mainly infiltrating certain volumes of stormwater. And the other one is quantity, and that's reducing through detention practices the amount of water that goes downstream from the interchange project. And the criteria that were used for this project were the unified sizing criteria out of the ordinance. And in terms of the quality aspect, there's kind of 3 components that we looked at. One is the recharge volume, that's infiltrating the first ½ inch, excuse me, of rainfall, and that applied to kind of the new pavement surfaces. There's a water quality volume, which is infiltrating or capturing the first 1.25 inches. And that also applies to new pavement surfaces. And there's also the reconstruction volume, which is capturing the first 1 inch, but that applies to the existing pavement surfaces. On the quantity side of it, there's 3 components. One is the channel protection volume, and that's looking at what's known as a 1-year storm event, detaining or releasing that flow, detaining it, releasing it over a 24 to 30 or 36 or 48 hour period. And then there's also the overbank and extreme flood protection, which is looking at greater storm events like 2-year up to 100-year and releasing those at a rate equal to pre-development before the interchange and all the urban developments taking place. So those were the criteria that we used. And in terms of, I'll go to the next slide here. What we looked at in terms of the project was just the areas within the city of Clive itself. For this project, that's from the center line of Hickman south to University. And in this slide, this addresses some of the proposed detention basin locations. As you can see, Hickman Road is kind of in the center from left to right. Interstate 3580 is shown kind of in the middle, up and down. The green stars are the proposed basin locations. One of those basins is within the University Avenue interchange in the kind of the northwest infield area. The other basin is up at the top of the slide That's at the southeast infield area of the Douglas Avenue interchange. And there's also shown on here the Red Star's proposed alternate basin location that's shown in the southwest infield area of Douglas. And that alternate location is shown due to the fact that the university interchange is going to be eventually reconstructed, I think, as a diverging diamond interchange as well. But at any rate, that's going to be done several years down the road. But when they do that, it might be problematic to recreate the detention basin there with the volumes that they might have available. So in light of that, this alternate location up at the Douglas interchange was chosen, so that can avoid some problems down the road with that University Avenue interchange reconstruction.
To give the council some joy in this, after 2030, the DOT is looking at starting to completely reconstruct the Southwest Mixed Master, and that'll impact University. So you can anticipate work on the major highway infrastructure through this corridor for probably the next 10 years once this project starts. 10 to 12 years for all the work that's involved. So they're finishing the Northeast Mixed Master, which they still have a lot of work to do, but they're already starting to look at concepts of what happens to University South through Westtown Parkway associated with the Southwest Mixed Master. And the current working concept in their interchange justification report is looking at moving University to a diverging diamond and then changing some of the on and off ramp locations as associated with that. So just know that that's coming as well.
Well, that off ramp's a nightmare right now as it is, but.
And actually the proposed solution, and Council probably, I think I shared it a long time ago, but they, it would definitely make it way better than it is today.
Worse.
But it also cuts off some current. You wouldn't be able to do the 235 off to University exit anymore. It would eliminate that, but it would add some access to. So
between University and Grimes, it's just one big giant.
yep, it's starting to we're getting there. The timing of these things are intentional. So
we did look at detention at the Hickman interchange itself, but due to some volume constraints, we weren't able to do that above ground. In order to do that, we'd have to go to underground detention, and that would be pretty costly. We cost that out. In some conversations with city personnel, we decided to not go that direction. So this next slide shows some of the quality treatments that I spoke of earlier. Hickman Road there is shown kind of at the top, and the interstate. The bridges over Walnut Creek are at the bottom. First of all, we propose in each of these medians, these diamond-shaped medians on the west and east sides of the interstate. Within Hickman, there are these kind of graphics, these rectangles shown with kind of a diagonal patching, if you will. Those are bioretention cells. As you've heard about other bioretention cells tonight, those will have to be incorporated into all the aesthetic treatments within each of these median areas. Right now, they're just shown as what we need for area for treatment. So that's the first component. The next is these green kind of rectangles, if you will, by the Love's truck stop adjacent to the southwest infield area of the Hickman interchange and the southeast infield area of the Hickman interchange. Those are grass swales with a rock or aggregate subbase that will infiltrate and allow treatment of stormwater. They drain from north to south, and they'll ultimately discharge their flow into well, what's not infiltrated, it's all sloped down towards Walnut Creek. And this graphic here, this is just kind of a simple graphic of what this would be. With you have a grassed waterway with the rock infiltration trench here, a possible subdrain, and that would just that's one component of the treatment shown here.
So if we're going to lose, if we could potentially lose that University Avenue basin and we're discharging everything north to south, is that going to cause a problem in the future if we lose that basin?
No, not if we.
Everything's discharging north to south, right? And the basin is south at the south end of that.
Oh, well,
It comes south to north from there.
From university
Everything comes
drains
to
toward the north.
Okay.
These swales and these with the infiltration trenches that I'm showing on here actually drain from Hickman southerly to Walnut Creek. Whereas University, that area from University Interchange, it actually drains to the north towards Walnut Creek.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What's a Gambian drop structure?
That's what those purple squares, and those are wire or metal enclosed boxes, if you will, full of rock revetment. And what they're existing out there, and what they are kind of grade. They do some erosion control, and they help kind of flatten the grade out of that ditch. And I've been out there and looked at them. They're kind of beaten up a little bit. And as part of this project, while we're doing all this work, I thought we might as well replace them now as part of this project. And so they're showing on here. They're not really a part of the stormwater treatment, if you will, but they are going to be replaced as part of the overall project. So.
One thing to know about that ditch is there's actually two ditches there. One that the DOT kind of owns today for the interstate in Hickman, and then the Loves, we kind of call the Loves ditch. Because of the grading of what the new ramps that you see there for the diverging diamond interchange, the DOT is going to kind of be put in a position to actually acquire that area and convert it all into one ditch. So that's part of their right-of-way acquisition that they're going to be working on. They will actually take that over. The one caveat I will say is the trail component of that will be a city role. They will not acquire what they need for the trail. That is on us for that connection from north to south. That will go right next to that particular area. Am I speaking to that correctly, Nate?
That's correct.
That'll be a pretty big change for that ditch area, but put it in a much better condition than it is in today. But a lot of trees will be coming down to do that right. People happy. And you will see the truck stop more. So I want to be sure to point that out up front.
That's important.
Yeah, I know. That's why I bring it up now, is to smooth those grades out and replace those baskets and put a trail in. It is going to open up that viewpoint that is relatively treed today.
And the other treatment component shown on here in the upper right-hand corner, 111th Street, that's labeled there in the drawing in some purple shading. That's proposed soil quality restoration, in which the soil is mixed with compost, and that'll help its infiltration capacity. And we propose to do that up there. That's more of an urban roadway section, if you will. That there aren't ditches there. It's more urban sidewalks, and that seems to be a better fit up there for treating that area than a grass swale. So I'll go to the next slide here, and this is at the top is Walnut Creek. You can't quite see the bridges on there. At the bottom is a portion of the University Interchange. In the lower right or the lower left-hand corner in the legend that says regenerative conveyances, those are proposed, and they're those rectangles that are kind of shown in the ditches adjacent along each side of the interstate and in the University Interchange, just graphically where they'll be located and what those are. And I'm going to zoom in on this here, that top photo. These are a series of pools that are designed to capture stormwater, and there's a sand base, and the water slowly infiltrates down through these. And that's just another treatment option that we pose along within those ditches. It'll look somewhat similar to this photo, kind of a series of 3 pools, probably 2 to 3 feet in depth. But that's what's proposed along the interstate there. And then finally, this bioretention cell photo. If this is actually from your Clark Street project, I went out and took a photo of this. I maybe should have had another slide, but just for something for you to kind of see, what the bioretention cell photos or bioretention cells may look like in the median areas of Hickman. They might not look exactly like this. There are many options that we can use for those. But I just wanted to show, I include this as a kind of an illustrative.
They're very familiar with that bottom.
Yeah, I got that. I didn't know that before this meeting, but now I do. So, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Nate.
Thanks, Dave. So finally tonight, we'd like to wrap up, or maybe not wrap up, but we'd like to discuss the project cost for these corridor planning efforts, as well as some of the funding strategy that we are planning to undertake with grants and other funding sources. Let's first talk about project cost. So the cost associated with the corridor planning efforts is just under $8 million. $4 million of that would be associated with the bicycle and pedestrian improvements, including the bridges, the underpass of the interstate, the underpass of Hickman Road, the trail itself, as well as the trail down to the connection to the Greenbelt. There's about $3.3 million estimated for the landscaping and aesthetics. That includes a lot of all the features that that Tim went over. And the stormwater management component is just a little bit under 700,000.
And to be clear, that's just the planning.
That is, this is
The actual construction.
just,
Construction.
yeah. But yeah, sorry.
The interchange itself is a $70 million.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
76. There you go.
Yeah, to give it a kind of an order of magnitude here, the overall construction cost of the project itself without the additional enhancements is just shy of 77 million is projected right now. So we're looking at about a 10% increase to that to cover the cost for the corridor planning enhancements.
And just know too, in terms of the city's role and the actual, we'll call it the hard infrastructure of the interchange, that 76 million is formally, we will have finalization of this, but that is on the DOT. What's on the cities is the enhancements, that's 7.9 million that we're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's a split Clive, Urbandale,
Correct.
grants, et cetera.
Correct. And that's, yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
So the city of Clive has taken a lead on some of these initial planning efforts. There has been $2.5 million already secured for that, for the infrastructure component through the STBG program, which is the State Transportation Block Grant Program. That comes out annually.
That's the MPO.
Yep, the MPO. I think.
And there should be more of that hopefully down the road.
If you
Correct.
do your job.
No, I'm working on it.
Sure, that funding. Councilman.
I believe the applications have been in the $3 to $4 million range, and the awards have been in the $1 million range.
Right.
Yep. From that point, we've looked at additional funding sources available. The Iowa Clean Air Attainment Program, ICAP, is a viable option for this project. It qualifies. It's a program that looks to reduce emissions and, as the program states, attain clean air. There's about $4 million in that program for statewide, which we would plan to apply for, I believe, next year, so that funds are available for when construction is going to happen. Another option is TSIP, which is the Traffic Safety Improvement Program. That is typically limited to $500,000 per project. And that includes improvements for the signals, the divergent diamond itself, but mainly with the signal timing and safety improvements associated with the grade separated facility for the pedestrians. TAP is the Transportation Alternatives Program. That's also administered through the MPO. The entire MPO has about $1 million in funding per year. This project qualifies for that, and I think it would be a very good candidate to apply for. The grant process starts in December of this year with a pre-app, and funding would be, if funding is awarded, it would be available in like fiscal year 24. There's also some maybe non-traditional transportation funding grants. This I listed here, the Community Attraction and Tourism Grant, or the CAT grant. It's administered through the Department of Economic Development. The recreational trail component of the project is eligible, although it may be a little bit of a stretch with the attraction and tourism part of it. We do recommend further coordinating with Living History Farms to make that grant application be a little bit more attractive and possibly secure some of those funds. That is capped at about $1 million per project. And they typically are the last money in. You need to kind of secure all the rest of your funding, and they like to be kind of that last piece of the puzzle to get you over the hump.
The Weaver boys do guided trips of bridge jumping. Maybe that could be part of that tourism.
We stop.
Oh, you stop.
Matt, speaking of Living History Farms, what kind of coordination and communication we had with them? Obviously, their land is right where the project is going, very close to that. What's their feelings about this?
That has strictly been handled by the city of Urbandale. So they've been coordinating and communicating with them, and we've kind of put that on their plate of to-dos to coordinate with their organization. So.
Okay. We have also met with.
And you
Yep.
needed to meet with them because you were going to need right away.
Yeah, we've met with them. Ruth, her last name escapes me, but we've met with the executive director.
Ruth House.
Yes, thank you. We toured the project with her, mainly associated with the underpass, the Living History Farms Trail underpass that will need to be extended. We also kind of explained the rest of the project, and they seem very supportive in these early phases. As far as water quality, or stormwater management funding, you guys will be familiar with the Water Quality Initiative. I believe City of Clive has been very successful with that in the past. I list $150,000 here. Historically, there's been that $100,000 to $150,000 kind of cap on that funding. However, we've been informed that the cap has been lifted, and as recent as last year, they awarded a project. They awarded a grant of $250,000 for a project. We understand that it's based on the merits of the project and available funding. So certainly an option, certainly a viable option for this project. Kind of lastly, on the water quality side, is that there is a SRF general non-point source program, or loan program, I should say, administered through the state revolving fund. And it can provide up to 100% of the cost associated with those. I believe it's right now, the interest rate is about 3%, and there are flexible terms up to 20-year payback. So that is an option as well. With the relatively recently passed federal infrastructure bill, there have been a number of discretionary grant programs that have been announced. The two I list here, the Reconnecting Communities Discretionary Grant Program and the Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A, those looked extremely attractive when the announcement came out for this project. However, as we got into when the details were released, digging into it a little bit more, this project may not be a good candidate for those two. The Reconnecting Communities grant program is geared more towards low to moderate income. For example, like an inner city Chicago that was bifurcated by I-75, and now there's no connectivity between the communities. That's kind of what this grant is geared towards. This project is eligible for it, but we're looking at the scoring of the grant application, and at this time, we wouldn't recommend pursuing that. The other thing I would mention with that is it is a $5 million floor. So not a cap, it's a minimum. And it comes with a 50% match. So your project has to be above 10 million in order to actually get the construction dollars. There's some other components with how much money you can match with federal dollars, but at this time, we would not recommend pursuing that. This, similarly with the SS4A, or Safe Streets for All program, there are some prerequisites as far as having a safety plan in place, and this project would have to be part of that safety plan. Currently, there is not a safety plan in place. The Des Moines MPO is going to apply for a grant to do that safety plan. And this project may be part of it, but the timing of construction will probably, it'll be too late to apply for it. So at this time, we don't recommend spending the dollars needed to get those grant applications completed. However, there's new grants being announced almost weekly, and we're keeping our eye on those federal, from FHWA, those federal releases, and we'll keep looking for those grant opportunities.
Didn't we
The
have some
council will recall, we
opportunities?
had quite a bit of conversation in our DC trip about Hickman interchange, and we were learning more about these programs. Obviously, Senator Grassley's staff kind of steered us away from reconnecting communities as well. We're hopeful that we start to see some programs that more align with what we're trying to accomplish here, and that there is some federal dollars at some point that we can go after for this project. We have some state options up there, but I think what's really going to be important for this council as we head into strategic planning next week, that there is the potential that if we're committed to this, and Urbandale as well, in our conversations with them, that we may not get all 8 million through grants, that could be a portion, and depending on how successful we are, a significant portion that will be on the two cities' dimes to bring this vision forward.
The good thing is that all of the grant opportunities listed, we have not missed the deadline for them. And generally speaking, we'll be applying for them in the next about 12 months for the funding to be available for the construction project. To kind of wrap up, I apologize, I never actually put a slide together on this, but I want to talk about the project schedule. Matt kind of indicated that in his initial remarks. We have turned in preliminary plans to the DOT for the interchange back on July 1st. Iowa DOT is actively designing the right-of-way. We do have a public information meeting planned for November 22nd. As Matt mentioned, the second Tuesday before the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. From that point, Iowa DOT will be actively negotiating and acquiring the right-of-way necessary for the project. We as a design team will be in final design, breaking the project up into manageable bid packages for the initial construction package will be out for bid in the summer of 2024. Don't really anticipate any work to happen in 2024. It's basically more associated with lead times for the bridge beams that are needed. Work will get underway in earnest in 2025. We hope to have it wrapped up in the fall or winter of 2028, but most likely fully wrapping up in 2029.
And as you've indicated to staff, it's really the interstate bridges that are first.
Correct.
And that the Hickman work is the later phase.
The bridges have to be replaced in order for the bulk of the interchange to get reconstructed underneath of it. Traffic will be maintained on the interstate at all times, 3 lanes in each direction. Traffic on Hickman will be maintained as much as possible, 2 lanes in each direction with turn lanes at the ramps. However, we are planning to shut down Hickman Road for a period of time to get the bulk of the heart of the
short time.
Short period of time.
What does short time look like?
We're looking at 30 to 45 days. Detour routes will be posted. The ramps will still be open, but you won't be able to cross under the interstate. You'll be able to get off and go one direction, or you'll be able to come to it and get on in another direction, but you will not be able to go through or east-west traffic for a period of time.
Work that's underway, and again, it's been very slow because of utility relocations, but the work at 128th on Hickman leading up to the interchange is a part of that planning, where 128th and Hickman is being expanded with additional turn lanes. Kind of, again, we need to do that from a capacity, but it's also, we wanted to do that ahead of the interchange because we know we're going to have the need for detour routes. And so essentially Hickman will be 6-laned from 128th leading up to the interchange, prepping for this work, and then that'll receive into a new interchange by 2028.
Be happy to entertain any other questions you have at this time.
$8 million estimate, is that based off of current inflationary prices, or was that done a while back, or?
It's based on current dollars today.
So what's the projected real cost then? Would you look at projected costs increasing, inflation, things of that nature?
It's really difficult to determine. We are seeing a lot of inflationary pressures, especially on construction, supply chain issues as well for lead times. Within those cost opinions, we have programmed a 20% contingency. So we hope that that would take care of those inflationary pressures. But we haven't actually done an analysis on an individual bid items to look at the future.
And again, we'll talk about a series of the next steps associated with this next week as we dig in on actions, both in coordination with Urbandale in terms of what we want to do for grant applications and coordination, and then access agreement, other next step items that we'll have before you as we talk about this next week.
You begin to put it out for bid when?
Summer of 2024.
Really, it's bridge replacement 25, 26 on the interstate, Hickman 27.
20, yes,
yeah,
roughly.
Yeah, and
there's
cleanup in 28, really.
Yeah, the
hopefully.
staging is rather complicated. There's different pieces that get built at different stages, but that's a general timeline, yeah.
That's all being driven by the DOT though, right? And so, because we're just one small piece of that.
That's 100% led by them, managed by them. You know, in terms of our cost components that'll be included in the design, the bill that will come to us, whatever we have left will come at the end, you know, later. So we can plan for that financially. We do have, as the two cities have to, if, for example, we're able to get grants for 50% of it, and we have 4 million to split between the two cities and 2 million, we can plan for that in the out years of our CIP if needed. But it depends, though. There might be some direct Clive costs up front. For example, like the trail connection down to the Greenbelt. You know, there might be some work we need to do in terms of land acquisition that will be on Clive that the DOT won't do for us, that we need to understand in this design process of what's on the cities directly and what's outside of the scope of the DOT right away.
Correct. There's also would be some upfront costs with final design associated with some of the corridor planning components as well.
Right.
I'd like to clarify one thing on the university reference. Did I hear that we just lose a detention basin or also the on-ramps?
So what we know so far with the initial planning efforts for the Southwest mix is that the ramp, so opening day in let's call it 2028, this will be the configuration of the southbound off-ramp at University. In this particular exhibit, north is to the right. What we know is that they're planning that this loop ramp for the southbound on will be eliminated, and that area will be used to reconfigure this ramp to come up and connect to University at roughly this location. They are planning for a diverging diamond interchange. There'll be a new on-ramp that travels kind of where my mouse is showing here. I'm not doing a very good job of it, but that will be an on-ramp, and you will only be able to go on I-80. You will not be able to continue southbound on I-35. And that is to help eliminate those safety issues in conjunction with the weaving that happens at the Southwest mix. I mean, you've all been there. It's when it's really busy, it can be quite precarious.
I close my eyes there too.
It's really bad for a 16-year-old to try to.
Yeah, I bet.
Trust me.
Well, I realize it seems like, aren't we focused on Hickman now, but I'm just concerned about various access or lack of it to University if we're losing some of that, because we've really depended on that coming from there. So I just think, you know, to go out to 114th or 100.
The detention basin component that Dave spoke to earlier in this area, that's one where we have seen the conceptual design where that ramp would kind of bifurcate through there. which that detention basin would have to be either severely rehabilitated or rebuilt. That's why we're looking at that alternative location up at Douglas. There aren't any plans in the near to intermediate term at Douglas right now.
But what does something in Douglas do to help this?
So
Water coming at it.
But from Douglas to
Yeah,
across the creek,
our standards,
it goes from the other side of the creek.
right, our standards can be, you can, wherever water is coming from, as long as you're slowing it down before it's getting to where it's ultimately going to end up, it can even be upstream. That's okay.
I'm asking Ray to confirm that. You on board with that?
Let me get back to you.
Thank you. Confer with your people. That doesn't make sense, but.
Any other questions or we let Nate go?
Well, I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for letting us present this very important project. And you'll probably be seeing me in the near future at future council meetings and at the public information meetings. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
Nate. Appreciate it. Next up, we have Indian Hills Woods. Richard.
Richard's presentation is already up.
Okay.
All right, it just needs to be switched over. Thank you. Good. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Wanted to just take a little bit of time tonight to give you an update on where we've been with the Indian Hills Woods projects and what's to come. And I believe we have at least one resident that has been participating in a lot of our input meetings and discussions we've had. So they probably want to say a few things at the end as well. But so just wanted to spend a little bit of time overview of what we've completed so far. So two major things have been done so far. We finished phase 1 of the creek restoration. That was a major effort by Public Works and then the parks teams to kind of help wrap that up to get that first phase done. And then we spent quite a bit of time working with the residents and interested parties about what does that landscape look like after we're done with the creek restoration project, and then what does the trail look like when we're done. So you can see here, the first photo is just a photo of the input we had. What we've tried to do with most of these input meetings with the residents is actually have them on site. We found we're able to talk to them about their specific issues. What does it look like behind their property? What are some of their concerns? And so it's a great way for us to host public meetings and get out of the office for a little bit. And the second photo is just the Public Works crew there showing some of the really detailed work that they had to do to make this work and make it work right. Using that huge piece of equipment to very minutely move those boulders in a way that does it in a way that helps the creek be stable and succeed with the project goals. Here's just another photo of that phase 1 work. So what you see at the top of the photo is 98th Street. And so we're looking to the west here, but you can see probably about 2/3 of that first phase of restoration once we got all the work done and seeded and the bank stabilized with some jute mesh to hold it down until the vegetation grows. But you can see here a massive undertaking by the Public Works team to do this in a way that was really, it's a cool result so far. Again, just a couple other photos of some of the work that they've done, very finely tuned work using boulders, trees, bushes, shrubs to put together this stable creek. The first one is looking from the existing walk bridge across the creek to the south. The picture on the top right actually shows how we were able to use logs that were taken down as part of the Greenbelt restoration project between 100th and 114th. Those were actually used to bury in the banks to stabilize that bend in the creek that we saw here in this previous picture. So that bend right there, kind of on the far left-hand side, that's where those logs were buried to help stabilize that in higher flows. And then the bottom right is just, again, above with a quick drone shot of Public Works working out there just to see the kind of detailed work that they had to do to get this project done. this works here. Just a quick video. This is taken earlier this spring, just showing how some of this looks as water's flowing there. It's not a top of bank type event, but it started to give us a feel for how this worked and what it looks like in action. You can start to see how the way they put all those rocks down helps kind of define how the water moves through this space. It helps it be in a much more sustainable way. Apologize for being jumpy like that. So just a few seconds there, but you can see taking all that work we put into that and allowing that creek to flow through there, depending on no matter what the level of the water is, and still be done in a stable way that protects the private property, some of the issues we had through this area here, as well as making it more ecologically sound. Next, I'll kind of walk through some of the upcoming projects. So the big things that we have coming up here are the second phase of the creek restoration. That will take the restoration from the pedestrian bridge east-west all the way to Walnut Creek. So all the way up to Lincoln, and then about a next couple hundred feet beyond that to where Indian Hills Creek dumps into the larger Walnut Creek. We also will be looking at and undertaking the first phase of landscape restoration. There's areas that aren't needed for public works to access the site for phase 2 restoration. Those are mainly on the south side of the creek and the east side of the creek on what's been done in phase 1. So we're able to get in there and start doing some of the restoration. That will include buffer work that we'll talk about here in a little bit, trees being replanted, and then native vegetation being reestablished through that whole area there. Next, we'll talk about the trail design and construction. So that's something that we're looking at based on some of your guidance tonight and the budget process. Starting design over this winter with the hope of starting to look at that, bidding that out and getting it under construction next fall, with that wrapping up probably in the spring of 2024. And then finally, we'll work to restore the rest of the site starting in spring of 2024. So that'll include all the buffer restorations behind all the properties, as well as all the other landscape restoration through the rest of the property. So just as we looked at trail and landscape planning with the residents, and the council hired RES, which is the company has done the Greenbelt Management Plan. We felt like the synergy working with them on the Greenbelt Management Plan really tied in nicely to this here, just down the street from that area. Some of the things that we focused on with this restoration planning work with the neighbors is restoration of the park with native plant materials. This area was choked with a lot of invasive species like honeysuckle and some non-native trees that are out there. So focusing on removing those, but still at the same time giving people the desired privacy that they'd like to see from their property between the space. Also looking at a paved trail with areas to access the creek and places to sit. That was one of the things that we heard a lot is when people access a space, they like the contemplative nature of it. They want places to sit, maybe get down and access those creek areas. And then one of the things that we really spent a lot of time focusing on was different screening options for adjacent property owners. We heard some people say that they wanted to be able to see into this space. And then we had other people say that they really wanted it to be private like it was before the creek restoration work. They wanted a dense buffer. So working on different screening options that we can sit down with each property owner and say, hey, what type of screening would you like behind your house? Do you want to be able to see through there? Or do you want to have a really dense kind of block between there? So it gives us an opportunity that there's not a one size fits all kind of solution to this.
Richard, with that, and I appreciate that flexibility. A lot of the feedback that I heard was, again, some folks, change is difficult, right? And this is a big change for those residents right there. How far along are we with communicated citizens and coming up to those agreements on what kind of screening options they want? Are there still some folks on that haven't chosen that yet, or how far down the road are we?
So what we've done at this point is we've kind of got a layout for what the trail would look like, as well as what are the different screening options. There's 3 different options. There's a wide open type option that might include a tree, maybe a couple shrubs. There's kind of a medium one, and then there's a dense one. We have not had any individual conversations with any of the properties yet. That will come here this fall and into the winter as part of that process. We'll focus more on the areas. So the map that I have up here, we will focus on the areas on the south side of the creek through here, because that's where the areas that Public Works doesn't need. So those will be the ones that we'll work to hit first, and then we'll work with the rest of them throughout the winter to see what type of buffer do you want. So those conversations haven't started, and it'll be kind of along that continual process of this.
How will those foment? Will those go on an individual basis? Will it be a group meeting? Will it be a website consideration?
So what Pete and I kind of talked a little bit about it. What we think it'll do is it'll be out to a letter, invite them through a couple different ways. They can email us what type of option they want. If they want to have a larger conversation, they can call and set up a time either through email or phone call. We can go out on site and meet them. So we'll have plenty of options for people to do that, because we know some people will want to talk through it a little bit more and probably get in depth on, like, I'd prefer to have the tree here, a shrub here, that type of thing. Others will just say, hey, I'm good with, throw in the light buffer behind my property. So we think it'll be just a combination of things, and we want to make sure we give ourselves plenty of time to go through that process.
Councilman, there was one important addition that came directly from the residents from previous meetings we've had. When RES initially was thinking about the buffer, they didn't incorporate as many large kind of brushy bushes that would be the 10 to 15 feet tall that could provide some really good screening right alongside some of the houses. So in the course of conversations, we heard that and decided, let's see if we can add some of that. It's because it can quickly give you that screening that was taken away from some of the residents, especially as you look at the north-south stretch from the pedestrian bridge down to Lincoln, which is where we are particularly close to backyards, and there was a lot of screening that was lost. So we've already had some good input there and good contributions by the residents.
Kind of related to that, I remember one issue that came up in the meeting was wildlife habitat, that people were really concerned about that having been lost. So in addition to what people are asking for behind their homes, what's the concept that helps to make sure that that's being restored?
Yes. This next map kind of shows a little bit more. So the way we've kind of looked at it is the buffer areas, which is the area right behind the property owners, and then there's the rest of the space. So in the buffer areas that we've been talking about, so what Pete was talking about here, we went through several iterations of, like what type of the buffers could look like, what would they look like when they're first planted, what would they look at like after a couple of years and after 5 years, to start to give people like, hey, we know that when we plant this tree, or this shrub, it's not the final solution. It's going to take a little bit of time to grow into that. Then beyond that, you can see on the rest of the area outside those green, orange, and pink buffer areas, that's the restoration of the rest of the land that's out there. So all the white circles represent existing trees that will stay as part of this. So essentially, what you go out and see out there today, it represents all the white circles. And then all the black circles on there represent new species that we're going to start to plant in there. They range in size to variety. We work with RES to ensure that it's all species that are native to central Iowa, and even looking at with climate change and how that's adapting. Are there species that aren't doing as well here? So we try to avoid some of those. And then beyond that, the whole area is planned to be seeded with native plants and shrubs beyond the trees. So we will do shrubs as well as then native seeding of prairie and woodland type mix. And that's something that'll evolve as those trees grow too. We'll have to transition more to a woodland mix over time, but we'll start out with a prairie because there's quite a bit of open space right now.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Anecdotally, I can confirm that the amount of aquatic life that I see when I go out and look at the pools and the moving water has been a really delightful surprise. Amphibians, fish that were present in those pools as the water was coming up, which is something that I did not see prior to that. When I went through that, the residents maybe have had more opportunities to see those things, but I was really happy to see it just from the restoration work already done.
Richard, to Councilmember Jenkins' question, the other plantings that will be in there, are we looking at, outside of what, the residents are directly looking in terms of screening? Are we talking pollinators? I know birds was a big thing that was discussed by the neighbors. What are we looking at kind of for the staff? We'll call it the staff directed portions of this for that kind of piece.
Yeah, so there'll be a whole mix of, it'll be a high kind of form mix of flowers that will be really attractive to butterflies and other pollinators, but also in some of those areas, maybe where we're going to put a bench, we're going to work to maybe focus some plantings. We have a much higher concentration of flowers that might attract butterflies and bees like that, and provide some educational opportunities. We've also talked about maybe there's areas where we put a small bird blind and things that attract different types of birds just beyond that, so people can see them in a way that really emphasizes that natural resources and the wildlife and the habitat out there. It'll take a couple of years to really get this going, but We feel like we've got a nice plan here that RES has that expertise in telling us how we can have a much better ecological situation out there within a couple of years than we had prior to this.
I'll donate 20 chipmunks from my hood.
There are some resident woodchucks out there. Some of the conversations we've had with people have gone out to different people's houses, and while we're sitting in their kitchen looking outside, you see chipmunks that would come from down by the creek area, and they hide under their deck. So there's quite a bit of wildlife out there that I think people really would like to make sure that we encourage that and make sure that it's something that's be an aspect of this place. So next is kind of working on to the trail discussion. Up to this point, the existing conditions out there were basically a small wood chip or dirt path that basically transected the whole area from 100th Street all the way down to Lincoln. It was pretty overgrown with the honeysuckle and some of the shrubs. Also then too, we'll kind of walk through some of the discussions we've had in the neighborhood about the trail, the Greenbelt Master Plan, and then we have a few things kind of walk through on what's the starting and ending point of this trail and what does that route look like. And then we have a few discussion questions related to the trail at the end. So like I said, the first part is the pre-existing conditions out here. Much of this was that dirt mulch trail. I believe every year or two, my staff would go out and add some mulch to it, but it would get beat in pretty good. There's a decent amount of traffic from the residents or from the neighborhood and very dense vegetation around that. And then there has been for quite some time a paved sidewalk that connects between Northwest 96th Street and Northwest 97th Street. It has a small bridge across the creek that is utilized as a school walk route for Indian Hills Junior High. So that's been there as well. And that's like a 4-foot sidewalk. This is probably gives the high points. I know Dakota's here. He'll probably give some of the other points beyond this, but some of the things that we heard out here when talking about this, there was a lot of concern initially about the loss of trees, and residents were absolutely correct. There was a lot of tree removal that had to be done to get this project underway, to get that creek stabilized. But a lot of things we did here as well was they like the feeling of it being natural space, a lot of what Susan's talked about, and butterflies and really being attractive to the pollinators. They want it returned that way when this project is completed. They also want the project, the trail to be put back when it is completed from Lincoln to 100th Street. Some of the probably maybe disagreement or kind of probably the most discussion we've had is what does that trail look like? A request for a small bridge that what used to be west of 98th Street, but was taken out when a previous stormwater project was done. That was prior to my starting. So
sewer protection, yeah.
So there was a project there west of 98th Street. They had a small footbridge, have had quite a few requests for that to go back in because it was replaced with just a few rocks across the creek. A majority of the people supported the paved trail, but there was desire, and I think you'll hear that from Dakota, for it to remain dirt or mulch once the creek project is completed. So just wanted to throw in here the Greenbelt Master Plan. This is what was proposed as part of that. So it'd be a paved connection from the Greenbelt Trail to this neighborhood, and then that would result in a new bridge across Walnut Creek. So currently, you're able to cross from this neighborhood to the north right here. I think this is 97th Street, just to the south of that. The proposal is to eventually construct a new bridge here that would connect this trail into the Greenbelt Trail system. At that time, this bridge would probably be removed because it is one of the oldest ones in our system and one of the narrowest that we have that crosses the creek. So just want to start with that on what the Greenbelt Master Plan calls for. Longer term would be the bridge across Walnut Creek. A lot of that will deal with the timing and what results the council wants to take on some of the projects that were identified in the Water Resources Master Plan. This area called for a potential remander of Walnut Creek through here. So we wouldn't want to put a bridge across Walnut Creek and then move the creek, and then we have a bridge that basically goes over mud. So we want to make sure that that is figured out first before we figure out how to connect it across the creek. Next is looking at proposed trail extents and alignments. So when the creek restoration project was envisioned, really was only talked about putting the trail in between 98th and the Lincoln. But you can see on that previous image, the trail in the master plan calls for it to go from 100th all the way up to Lincoln. So there's a couple of different extents. What do you want the project to be from option A or option B? And then when we look at that, then there's options on what does the actual trail alignment look like and what is the resulting trail from that. So try to walk through that. If you have questions while I'm doing that, I'll try to answer them as best I can. But so looking at the starting and ending point, there's two options here. So option A is taking the trail from Lincoln Avenue here and connecting it all the way up to 98th Street. Right now, we have one bridge that we know we're going to have to replace. This is a small wooden bridge that has existed over the creek for quite a while. That'll be need to be replaced with a new bridge that allows the flows to go under the bridge.
Is that connecting the hills?
Yes, correct. Yeah, the purple is the east-west sidewalk right there through there, and the bridge sits basically in the middle of it.
But option A is basically status quo, right?
Status quo, correct. Well, no, because actually the trail does continue west. The dirt trail continues west from 98th Street. It crosses with those stone about right there, and then it kind of dumps out right there. So B would be option B would be the status quo, but a paved trail. Along with that, there are a couple of different things here that wasn't originally envisioned in this project when the capital improvement budget was put together. It was just the section between Lincoln and 98th. So I'll complicate this a little bit more now. We'll talk about alignment options. So we have two alignment options here. So partially, depending on what extent you choose, kind of defines that, but then also too, the experience of the trail that we want to have also goes through that. Option A is basically one bridge. We replace the existing bridge out there. And option B is one we're calling three bridges, because in order to make the experience really work out there, you'd have to cross the creek in two places. The first one is the existing bridge that gets replaced. The second one would be somewhere along this east-west segment of the creek. And the third one would be replacing or adding the bridge back that was taken out when that sewer protection project was done, which is approximately right here.
So is there an option to do two bridges, like just the one on?
So some of the things we've looked at here, this was one of the things we spent quite a bit of time in this area here. The way this would work, the trail would come up here to 98th Street. And what you'd have to do at that point is you'd have to jog down the sidewalk to the south a little bit, and then cross the street and have that second bridge. The reason why we didn't propose that, at least at this, is it just doesn't create as nice of a trail experience. It jumps you up to the sidewalk, and you have to widen the sidewalk for 50 or 65 feet, and then you have to cross the trail again. So just have a lot of kind of zigs and zags through there. Could it be done? Absolutely. It's just not as nice of an experience.
Yeah, I was out here. I walked it today. I'm kind of with Shrikant. I'm not seeing the need for bridge number 2. That's not a very far walk from where it exists current is. I mean, it's literally just kind of a little jag over to the left. And I don't know, it just seems like that's a lot of additional cost just for a few feet. So I don't know, it seems like we should have a different option with maybe only the 2 bridges.
Yeah, absolutely.
I like how the residents feel, I think even beyond the residents, but I like that kind of creek crossing without a bridge. And how often would it be impassable, with boulders or what have you? I mean, we're trying to produce that right next door is the boulder experience, getting into the water, crossing over, no bridges over at the aquatic center. Why not here?
Like, I'm kind of with you on that. I've crossed over that myself, and I found it kind of a unique experience. It's not difficult to do. It's easy to do, but it is unique. It's different. And it's kind of what we've proposed in Greenbelt Landing. It's original. It's cost effective. I'm not sure how many people even go down to 100th Street and use it to really justify the cost of a bridge there. Would it be nice? Of course it would. Is it cost effective? Is there an ROI on that? That's another question.
So I would say this, if you choose to have the trail, if you want to go all the way 100th Street, you will need to do something that allows that through there, because that would not be ADA accessible. So by having that there, but we have talked about, depending on what option, still having access points down to the creek in that exact way, where you would cross over maybe a couple spots, throughout this route here, and maybe have a little bit of dirt trails that wind through that area there. So absolutely 100% agreed that it's a great environment to create something like that. We did get several requests because of that, where they used to have that bridge there from people that walk that way. So I will say that part of it.
But the ADA accessibility is only necessary if we pave it. Is that
Correct.
right? So I
Yes.
mean, if that's mulched from all the way
Mhm.
from 98 to 100, then
We wouldn't have to worry.
it's not
about it.
necessary.
You also have an option. It's a little tight, but there is the ability to put a paved trail on the north side of the creek from 98th to 100th. On city property. It gets a little closer to that residential property on the corner.
Mhm.
But there is the ability to do that and get up to 100th with a paved trail without a bridge crossing.
And I just as point of clarification, we may need to double check on what triggers ADA requirements. I don't think that paving or not paving is the trigger.
Well, but the current trail right now is not exactly ADA compliant.
Well, I was going to bring that up because
The surface type would be more akin to ADA accessibility than a soft trail. That's the surface.
Correct.
so right now the space from 98 to 100th is left as sort of just I'm not gonna say Wild West. We do some mowing and some mild maintenance back there, but it's
Yeah.
more of a goat path.
Goat path.
And so that's Clive, it's a goat path. But what Richard's question really is raising here is, to what extent does the council want to bring more intentionality to that space? Because then we're pretty close to backyards. The question was raised about that crossing specifically by a resident who lives right there at the corner of 98th and
The one on the corner.
Carpenter. Yeah. There's also some questions as we get
Right
into
here.
this space about the stormwater that really comes crashing into that space. And there's a lot of modeling that our previous stormwater engineer did to sort of understand what the risk was that we might be there for those houses. As we keep them changing the space, that changes up potentially some of the stormwater conversation there as well.
It's a good grazing area.
Could be a good grazing area.
I'm wondering, it sounds like you had some comments from residents that were kind of mixed as far as, do you want it paved or do you want it more natural? I'm wondering if there's options to kind of incorporate both, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely there is. Yep,
to
for
do
sure.
Maybe some mixing of those paths. So not everything is hard surface, but not everything is just, mulch.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely opportunities for that, creating natural creek crossings, some dirt mulch trails throughout there, as well as the paved trail. Absolutely.
I know tonight too, on a lot of these questions that Richard will get into, is you don't have to decide tonight. We're already kind of putting on the calendar a neighborhood meeting in early September to further, we want to put these in front of you to start thinking about them. And as we think about timeframes, and there's costs, right? We want to get into that piece of it too and get a kind of an initial reaction from you all. Because if we know that there's things that are just kind of, we'll call it off the table, we won't necessarily, we'll position that appropriately and not overcommit the city to anything that you don't want us to commit to. So that's kind of part of the discussion tonight as well.
Yep. So maybe I'll take that next step and then into kind of talking about some of the budget. So this is the overall budget for the Indian Hills project. So this includes land restoration, all the creek work for phase 2, and then estimated trail costs. So these are estimated costs within the last 2 or 3 months from bid projects that I actually talked with Snyder and Associates and a few other, Beanster and Kim, on what they're seeing from costs. So just maybe the most relevant notes based on this. There is one bridge, so replacing the one bridge is about $70,000. So that one we've said it has to be part of the project. But then as we start to look at the rest of the project, the bridge 2 is about $118,000 and bridge 3 would be about $82,900. The reason why those are higher than bridge 1, bridge 2 would be a little bit of longer to cross the creek, and also factoring in the engineering costs to design and get the bridge abutments done.
But you're just refresh us, which one of those bridges are where? Is bridge 1 the one that goes to school?
Yep.
Bridge 2 would be across.
Would be
along a
east of
creek?
east of 98th Street.
East of 90, and what about bridge 3?
So
You're replacing the one that was existing.
So bridge 2 would be right there, east of 98th, and bridge 3 would be west of 98th.
Are these wooden bridges?
So they would be the typical prefabricated bridge that we have on most of the other trail crossings on the Greenbelt Trail. So real similar to the one at the Aquatic Center is probably the best comparable example. Just a different length. That's quite a bit longer. Yeah, I think that's 110 feet.
20.
110, 120 feet, and those would be a neighborhood of 40 to 60 feet wide.
And what's wrong with the Indian Hills Bridge? Is it just old? It's out of its lifespan?
It just doesn't have enough freeboard underneath the bridge for higher flows. And so then that would become a backup point.
It's not very old either.
Mm-mm.
It's only 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, and we've actually talked about, we're going to probably salvage it and find another location in the park system. Yeah.
The stream.
So you can see there, I think the council's mentioned that there's quite a bit of cost to put additional bridges in as part of that. And then also too, right now, it kind of exceeds what we have allocated in the budget. So based on some of the guidance we get here from you, as well as kind of the neighborhood walkthrough that we get, we'll adjust and provide a revised budget estimate to the council as part of the budget process.
So Richard, I know I've spoken to Dakota and
Yeah.
with him on this. But you've heard from others. I haven't heard from others.
Mhm.
I'm primarily just corresponding with Dakota. What's been the overall feedback on the paved versus natural that you and Pete have seen?
Yeah, so like I said, this is just a general of what I've heard. I would say most people have been supportive of the paved trail. And there's been at least several that are concerned about it being paved, about it being a larger regional connection to the Greenbelt, and that it would bring a lot of traffic into the neighborhood if it was paved. So that's probably maybe Pete can add more to that, but I think that's probably a pretty fair summary.
That negative externality or perception of a possible externality of more people coming up into the space because of a paved surface as opposed to a mulch surface or whatever we'd have back there, dirt. I think that's fair to say. That's been a good question we've had, a consistent question we've had. I think it's not conclusive that the neighborhood has leaned one way or another yet on paved versus not paved. We've had some very engaged residents, which we appreciate, but we haven't had the full representation of what you might consider all of the immediate stakeholders. The other point there is that that's used extensively by a lot of families that are going back and forth to school, get on the trail, head south, head north, head down to the Greenbelt. So even while it's important to take into consideration the immediate neighbors, there's also the question about the broader use of folks across multiple neighborhoods.
And I know I've shared this with a couple of you have asked, as to Pete's point. I think that's a policy question for this group, is the level of investment that the city has made in this area to remedy the stream erosion issues, but now investing back and truly making this a park space, as was envisioned in the Greenbelt Master Plan. It is really a park for a park space, albeit a passive park, and with the trail and the benching and some of the other amenities that we'll put in there for the broader neighborhood. And in any other situation in the city, if that was the same scenario, we'd be putting a paved trail in that situation. And so also envisioning that future connection point to the Greenbelt, main Greenbelt Trail, even though it might be a number of years down the road, any of those kind of, we'll call it neighborhood extensions that we have in other parts of the community that come off that main spine are paved trails. So what we wanted to make sure we reflected is a consistency. We know it's a change. We know it's something different, but it's also what's the public good of this asset now that the city taxpayers have spent quite a bit of money putting into this space.
You know, I served on that Greenbelt Master Plan, and that was some key points that you mentioned right there. How do we incorporate the neighborhoods and the connectivity to the trail? How do we make it more accessible to other residents and citizens right there? And how does it, conform to the rest of the trail system and really allow more folks access to that? So those were key considerations. We've always thought we had a lot of discussion on this area in Indian Hills that it was underutilized. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity right there.
I'm wondering, when we're talking about paved surfaces, are we talking about like concrete sidewalks, or are we talking about something a little more flexible than that, like the pervious pavers and some of the other things that we've talked about? I mean, that might give it an air of a little bit more natural space, but it still gives us the usability that you're kind of talking about. It may not have the conformity, but it would allow for that kind of usability.
We probably haven't gotten that deep into it. I mean, I think our going into it, the staff's mindset has been the asphalt extensions that we've done into other neighborhoods, not necessarily concrete. But the one question that I don't know, and Richard would probably be able to answer better than me, is are there surface types like pavers or a certain kind of crushed limestone that has kind of that harder trail feel that meets that ADA accessibility, you know, for somebody in a wheelchair, or if you've got folks with you know, want to do certain kinds of, you have that kind of more stable surface that, you know, kind of meets in the middle, but I don't know what those requirements are. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
So, you know, I think there's a lot of different things. You know, some of the conversations we've had is maybe if it doesn't look as just stark as concrete and black asphalt, you know, could you give color to it, to concrete, or to make it look a little less kind of harsh out there and blend in, maybe a brown color to the asphalt or into the concrete. There are options such as maybe using a crushed limestone like Matt talked about that could be used like a glue binder to kind of keep it together so it doesn't get all eroded out and stays in a little bit more solid form. So there's a lot of different things I think we could consider through this area. It just depends on a cost and how much maintenance we want to have longer term.
I would like to hear more on Pete's point, not tonight, but I'll leave. No, not from you, but from research, but on the ADA piece, right? And I do have a hard time believing it has to be concrete or some kind of, because this last fall in Steamboat, and I got whooped going up and down by two people in wheelchairs, right? And heck, they were half a mountain away by the time I even got up the thing.
Yeah, but that's more a statement about you than anything.
True, that's true. But it was just a dirt trail up, and Dakota hasn't chewed my ear, but I like this as a unique area that it could be I don't like the compost or the mulch type thing specifically, and I want it to be maintained, right? So I remember that trail. That's trail when you come off of Lincoln, looks scary, right? Like, I'm not going up that trail. Who knows what's up that thing? In the past, it was very narrow and overgrown. And I want to be very well maintained, but I'm not sold on the concrete or blacktop or any of that. I really not. I think it can be a unique experience up there, but it has to be, I am set on, it has to be a citywide experience. No more of a private park behind the houses. That days over, right? It's going to be, everyone's invited to come up, but it's going to be inviting, right? And natural to me is how I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I agree with Mike in many ways.
Whoa,
I know.
hang on.
But I do think that's a big part of their concerns is that the natural look and feel that you're out in nature, right? And by throwing in just a slab of concrete or asphalt, you kind of lose that feel. So I would like us to look at some of those options, see what those costs look like. The one thing that does concern me though, is if we do go that path where we are paving it, are we locking ourselves into 2 more bridges then? You know, because that with the way it is currently with the mulch, I don't think you need the other 2 bridges. Once you pave it, well, maybe at least one, maybe you need bridge 3. I'm still not convinced on bridge 2, but maybe at that point you probably do need a bridge 3.
But I think like Matt said, you know, we do have some other alternatives based on the guidance that the council's given us tonight that we can dig in a little bit deeper on as we kind of progress through this to, you know, look at some of the costs and surfaces and how we get that more of a natural feel, but still have an accessible trail through there. I think that probably covers most of the dialogue we had there.
Dakota's.
Yeah, no, that's what I wanted to kind of, so we talked through kind of all these things that we saw here. And so kind of from a next steps before let Dakota and anyone else come up here, the reason we really wanted to have this discussion tonight with the council is because one of the things that Pete and Councilmember Weaver and I met with Dakota out there, one of the things we committed to them is bringing the council up to speed, but then providing opportunity for all the residents that back up to the area to have an opportunity to meet with any of you that want to come out and do a walk through this neighborhood here. So we want to make sure that you're kind of up to speed of what had happened to this point, and then bring this back at some point for a design contract with an engineering team to take your guidance and put that into an actual trail that we can prepare out there. And ultimately, based on where that goes, and we'll need to see if we need to adjust the existing funds that we have or try to find some additional funding for that.
And that's tentatively set for September 7th, right?
Well,
yes.
Then that's news for our residents here. We just got that set up this week, but we did get that set up.
So that's basically everything I have. I turn it over to Dakota or anyone else that wants to come up and speak about this. And looking forward to continuing this dialogue with some of the guidance we've gotten tonight and how we take this to the next step.
Thank you, Richard. And if you would identify yourself for the record, please.
Absolutely. Dakota Durr. I live in this area. My wife and family and I have lived there for 19 years. So really appreciate all the conversation tonight. Very good stuff. We are primarily interested in the trail surface. We have some other concerns, but I think those are all being handled. So I would like to, I don't know if you can fire up the document camera. I just think it's interesting. It's very difficult without, for me as a longtime resident, to explain what this felt like before. It was a very special place. It was almost like a storybook. We'd go back there for pictures all the time, and it just felt like it was an escape. You know, it was a way to get away. You just a few steps behind our house, and you're not in the city anymore. And great points that, you know, the trail was not very well maintained a lot of times. It was overgrown. It was very narrow. But that natural path, it made it feel like a forest. You know, it made it feel like a kind of a footpath through the forest, and it was something different. And so I really resonate with what you said, that it's not that we want to make this something that's just ours, and you know, we want to hold on to that. It's that we want it to feel natural, feel the same as before. And I'm sure you noticed in those pictures the canopy of trees overhead, right? I mean, it was like just a really, like I said, like an enchanted place. So so that's the probably the biggest concern, is that we want it to feel natural, as has been stated here. Another concern, I think, is that if you pave it, we do foresee and make it a connection, it is going to greatly change the feel, because you're going to have bikes flying through at high speed. So I'm not concerned about like a lot of extra traffic or anything, but our kids play back there. And, you know, I don't see a lot of kids playing next to the green belt. It just has a different feel to it. Again, it's difficult to put that into words, because I've lived there for so long. But so yeah, so I think, you know, maybe a compromise would be like a more natural looking hard surface. It doesn't completely help with the concern of people flying through. You know, it's supposed to be a quiet, reflective place, right? We're doing all this investment in the natural aspect of it. And I'm sitting there on a bench observing the butterflies, and here comes some bikers at high speed, potentially playing music. I mean, it's different, right? It's different. So, so I think those are some thoughts. I think you've covered a lot of great points otherwise. And I realize this is counter to the strategic plan. I just think this is an opportunity to have a space that is distinct by nature and literally a little bit different. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions? Anyone else in the chamber like to say something? And would you identify yourself for the record, please?
I'm Greg Pfeiffer. I live at 1617 Northwest 97th. I agree. I'd kind of like to see it maybe a packed gravel or limestone. I think like that trail in Northeast Polk County. And, you know, maybe there will be eventual ties into a bigger trail too. I don't know. We need to be concrete. It doesn't need to be private to me. It can be open to the public too. But more natural, like you said, Mike. And then one other thing, is this supposed to be kind of interactive trail? I mean, what if we have a low water crossing somewhere, like where that second bridge is, like you do out in the county, and people can walk? Maybe there's liability there, but just as an option to get people across the creek and save a bridge cost, or have something fun for kids. I don't know.
Thanks for your comments.
Your Honor, we do have a participant online.
Oh, very good. Please identify yourself for the record.
Emily, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. So my name's Emily Hostetter. I am a resident at Northwest 96th Street as well, backing up to the trail. And I just wanted to share my support for some of the made and that the council has made tonight. We have only lived here for about a year and a half, and having that beautiful sanctuary behind our homes was a reason that we bought in this area. So I love the point of making this a more accessible space for the other residents and this children at the school to utilize, but natural feel to it is definitely important to us. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Emily. Any other comments on this topic? If not, we've been at this 2.5 hours. We probably should take at least a 5-minute break. So we'll adjourn until 8:35. So reconvene the city council meeting following our short recess. Richard, you want to tell us about the public art and Parks and Rec?
Yes, I'll try to be brief here. Outlined in the memo that was attached to the council's packet, one of the strategic planning items from last year was to investigate the possibility of combining the Public Art Commission and the Parks and Recreation Board into one board that would have purview over both Parks and Recreation as well as public art. Since that time, have multiple discussions with both the Public Art Commission as well as the Parks and Recreation Board, and believe that it would be a good synergy to combine those together given the overlap in public art projects as well as the parks projects that we're working on. So the recommendation would be that I get an approval from both of them and bring it back ordinance changes in front of the council here this fall with hopefully a late 2022 meeting of this new board that would meet monthly.
Any questions for Richard on that? Any objections? Seeing none, we'll move to the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Amanda.
Better hurry because the professor's ready to go home.
I'll skip the pleasantries. So tonight's discussion is really intended to be a preparation for your strategic planning sessions. So the neighborhood plan identified the big implementation items, and staff has taken that and the engagement and public input that we'd received through the process, and we have drilled down onto what are the steps actually needed in the short, mid, and long term to start that implementation of those big ideas. So with that in your packet, there is a matrix that breaks those down by the plan chapters and themes for short, mid, and long term, and then kind of an overall big picture implementation one that covers some of those overarching items. Additionally, there's a memo in there that gets a little more detailed on the to-do list, and it starts to identify some of the big challenges and key issues we'll have to keep in mind long term so we don't lose that big picture. And then a really important part of this discussion is that the implementation is going to require a city department-wide effort. It cannot all just be done by community development or any one other department. And then to be successful, this will have to be a primary consideration during your strategic planning and allocation of staff resources, not just this session, but for many years to come as we really work towards how do we implement these pretty big changes that we'd like to see in the area. And I will add that we did have the full draft of the plan out for public comment for about a month or so on the website. We did get 300 unique views. So those would be individual IP addresses on that interactive site. There may have been more that opted to download the PDF directly. So that was just the interactive site we could track. We did receive 10 comments back, and the theme for tonight seems to be circulation, bike, ped connectivity, and safety has come up in every conversation. 7 of those 10 comments were directly related to bike and ped safety and connection improvements that people would like to see in the neighborhood. Generally captured already in the plan document, but some more specific kind of key concerns or comments that were raised. So with that, we can get into some of the specifics if you have any questions and what you saw in the matrix and that implementation memo. Doug and I are both here to help answer any of those questions. I know it has been a lengthy meeting. If you all need some time to kind of reset your brains and really dive into this with strategic planning, that is also understandable.
Amanda,
Questions for Amanda?
The document's up on your machine there if you need to pull that up.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead.
Is all that on the desktop, Pete?
Yeah, it's actually opened already as a PDF.
In your honor, what I would add, the theme of the discussion items tonight was, again, preparation for your conversations over the next 2 weeks. And particularly related to 86th Street, I can't emphasize enough Amanda's comments of, as you see in the matrix, that there's crossover between multiple departments, multiple resources to hopefully see the success that you all want to see with this 86th Street neighborhood plan. And I think a theme that you're going to hear from me next week is understanding those capacity needs and knowing that if we're going to be committed to this effort, there's a couple big items. Is what tools is the council comfortable with staff utilizing to implement? What tools can we have at our disposal? And that's going to be a very specific discussion we will have with you next week, because that's going to be very important, particularly when we're talking about circulation. and other elements of this plan. And then also that second piece of the capacity needs in terms of if we're going to get into some of these implementation items, it could be a few years at least of needs to stay focused, dedicated to it. And we understand, and that's part of why we do strategic planning, that may mean other things go to the back of the list if we want to stay focused and committed to things like Lenan, Harbach Center, the flood prone property buyout area, all the elements that you see in this implementation that we'll have a lot of resource to bring to it, but we wanted to make sure we did a good job of outlining all of that need, at least from staff's perspective in this matrix, which I think Doug and Amanda have done a good job of trying to identify all those components. But I jumped ahead a little bit, Doug and Amanda, on some of that, but I just want to make sure that the council hears that before we head into this discussion next week.
Yeah, just real quick, start off with, so really nice job. This is where you really start to get in the weeds with the action items on taking the overall large overarching concepts of the 86th Street plan and really dialing in on short, medium, long term and who's responsible for what, and really getting into the weeds on the implementation of this really big project right here. So I appreciate the heavy lifting that you folks have done on that. It's a lot of stuff, right? It's a lot of stuff. And Matt, I think we can appreciate that, with this kind of plan that, there's the bandwidth is on staff is certainly much greater. And also you look at, budgetary needs as well. If we're going to stick with this, we've committed to this, and especially with, how long we've been talking about Lenan Park, Mike. These are the real heavy lifting and difficult decisions that we make as a council right here. And I would just encourage everybody to continue moving forward with this. I think it's a good plan. I don't know how deep you want to get into it tonight. I think that's much better reserved for strategic planning, where we really have some more engaging discussions on this, but a really nice job of setting it up in your matrix.
It is, we've identified this as a featured item for your Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Your strategic issue discussion that you typically have.
This is a 6-hour discussion right here.
Essentially.
Especially with gentle density and some of the other concepts in here as well.
Doug.
And as much as I would love to get into the 6-hour conversation tonight.
Next Tuesday.
Yeah, next Tuesday.
I do want to just make sure that you're thinking about a few things between now and then, because, there's a lot of kind of standard, go do this, go get a grant for that, go plan this, go talk to people about this. And that's all well and good, but there are some very key things that happen before we do any of those to-dos. There are some pretty dramatic suggestions in what we're trying to accomplish in this neighborhood that you all really do need to carefully think about, because they will result in us spending lots and lots of time, energy, and resources to accomplish. And if we aren't really committed, then it's a lot of wasted effort up front. So kind of dig into this over the next few days as we get into strategic planning, when we're talking about things like the city potentially being part of the investment in the neighborhood, for example, or in some cases, changing a little bit of the mindset on this notion of rental property and rental owners kind of being out there maybe as not a great, willing, cooperative partner with the city. Maybe we have to change the approach and the attack to manage that condition and find ways that we're really supporting and potentially bringing along some of the property owners to get where we want to go. For example, in other cases, there are things that are going to be hard to talk about in terms of the change, like circulation, like taking a trail through a neighborhood or bringing a connection up from the greenbelt in a different location. And in a lot of those cases, it's going to be very, very hard for people to see the overall good beyond their specific benefit or impact. And that's very, very important for us to clearly understand going into it, that if we don't want these challenges or we're concerned about this precedent or that situation, let's avoid that. There's a lot of stuff here. And the more that we can kind of stay focused on, be committed to, and go and get things done, those things will compound and build upon themselves versus, stubbing our toe on lots of things and just kind of sitting in limbo or spinning around with different exercises. So really, again, happy to get into the minutia of the to-dos, but I think that would be better served at another time. And I really hopefully aren't going to get into the minutia of the to-dos at strategic planning. I really want to make sure that we're targeting those high level key issues, certainly the ones that we started to identify. If there are those ones that really make you queasy or make you concerned, let's talk about those and decide, are we committed to that or we're not? Because that will be very helpful as we start to move forward and really game plan for how we can accomplish this. I don't think there's anything that's being presented, any of the ideas, any of the projects, any of the policies really that aren't things that we can't do. There's nothing in here that is so unique, so groundbreaking. There's nothing in here that we can't do if we decide that we're committed to it, if we decide that we're in it for the long run, and if we're willing to grind it out for many, many years. I do think that you'll be able to achieve the outcome for this neighborhood over that time period.
But one of the things I'd like to get into more is getting some more color and details on how the city can partner and how we can offer incentives to upgrade properties. So that's a big subject right there. I'd like to talk far more about that in far more detail as well on some of the ideas and opportunities we have to help citizens with that aspect.
So speaking of that topic, I met with the executive director at Neighborhood Finance Corp last week. And Neighborhood Finance Corp, if you're not familiar with them, does exactly that. They provide grants to existing homeowners. So it's not for new construction or anything like that. It's going to be for existing homeowners who want to do some investments in their home. If you look at a map of their eligibility areas, just to our north in Urbandale is eligible. Just to our south in West Des Moines is eligible. And just to our east in Windsor Heights is eligible. We have this little pocket right there just east of 86th Street that has no eligibility. It is definitely something that can be done. Urbandale, they just got kind of north of Douglas approved for eligibility. The city of Urbandale's throwing in $75,000 on an annual basis from the general fund, and the Polk County is matching that. So they've got $150,000 that can be used for grants for those homeowners. To this point, it's always been $10,000. That's what I've always represented to my clients. So you can upgrade your home, you can improve your siding, your roof. I've had a client build a garage with an NFC grant. It's all forgivable as long as you don't move out within 5 years. If you do, it's prorated. But that's something that can be done here in Clive, and Stephanie and I talked about that. And so she's going to actually include that in her next round of funding as a possibility to her investors that this could happen. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone here was aware of it as something that's one tool in our tool bag that we can have, that will have a lot of different tools, but for our existing homeowners to be able to do those types of property improvements through forgivable loans. And so that's a real option that is very tangible, and that she has said it works very well when it's done in conjunction with other efforts by a municipality. So the whole, District 1 plan, it fits into that and can be marketed as part of that. And so it's much more effective that way, as opposed to them just having, this pot of money that homeowners never know about, right? So,
what I would say is, again, that is certainly one tool, one of the things that is available to be able to be used. The bigger thing that I want you to think about though is, we've not traditionally been in that business. And by that, I mean, the city has not typically been in the business of incentivizing or providing financial wherewithal to property owners to make upgrades. So that's the big headline that I'm suggesting is, do we want to kind of change our approach and be in the business potentially of investing in our community, investing in individual property owners?
Single family.
Could be single family, could be duplexes, could be somebody, if you want to build a quad, let's figure out a way to help. But is the city in that business helping today's property owners because we see the long-term value in the appreciation of the real estate? That's the headline topic that I'm suggesting that you all need to be thinking about. Again, the minutia is great. We can really get into all of the weeds when you want, but I want you to keep thinking about those headline topics, the circulation, the housing, all the other kind of big pieces, and the role of the city in making those things happen. That's what I want you to focus on in the next week or 2 weeks as we kind of talk through this stuff.
And I do expect the Economic Vitality Committee to be focused on various types of incentive programs that we may want to consider on the commercial side too, not just residential. And one of the things I was going to bring up is I like it that committee is referenced under administration, but it seems like it maybe should be under community development too, as that's an intention for that committee to interface with you.
Well, Doug, I think part of that, when you talk about that, it's part of a change of mindset. I mean, thinking outside the box, right? Because if we don't, it's going to be the same old with District 1. And if we don't get aggressive and take bold moves and think big, holistically, how it affects, then, it's just going to be another plan gathering dust on the shelf. And I think we'll have those conversations as we move into strategic planning.
So like I said, we're happy to go deeper tonight on any particular topic or the big headlines. But again, just really would appreciate you taking the time to dig in, really think about the role of the city and what the city is going to have to do to be able to see some of these things through. Because we know that by doing those things, we will achieve the greater good. That's the mindset I want you to kind of go into the strategic planning conversation with.
Just had a thought there. Of course, Des Moines has that in Invest DSM. So they're already doing it and have great success.
Absolutely.
Great success. Comments, questions, anything else for Doug or Amanda at this point? Otherwise, we have our marching orders to look through this before Tuesday.
I look forward to our 6-hour conversation.
At least. Probably spread over a couple of days.
All right, that's the last item. We'll turn to reports and go down to the end. Pete.
Thank you, Your Honor. Soil Quality Restoration Cost Share Program rolling along. Continue to receive payments from interested households once they've received their square footage total and their portion of the project. Next week, Polk County staff will be heading out to a number of yards to do soil quality testing. So testing for density, which tells us how well it takes water in now. And in some targeted areas across the city, sort of broken out by the generation of when the housing was built, when the neighborhood was developed, we'll be doing an infiltrometer test, which takes just a little bit longer to get done. We just initially thought we might go outside to Iowa State to do some of this work, but after consulting with our partners, we think we can get a lot of this work done with just our partners with Polk County Soil and Water as well.
What impact does drought conditions and having brick yards have on this?
We discussed that this morning for a couple of reasons. First, because we were thinking about the timing when we would do this. So we're going to work from west to east with the expectation that most of the households further west are more likely to have a sprinkler system, and that if they were using it, might have a little bit more normal content and moisture in their soil. But we're going to have to play it by ear. If we have to wait a little bit, so be it. Bigger question, should we be doing any of this work now, given that it's still so hot? So I called Des Moines Waterworks today and talked to their staff. Currently, they are still just recommending to folks that they do good, responsible stewardship. They're not requiring anybody to draw down, to cut back on their water usage. They want folks to stay with that odd even. There are some optics, though, that would create some problems for us because it is so dry. Everybody experiences it being dry. And even though we're not having problems with having enough source water, the flash boards on the Raccoon are more likely than not going up next week, is what I heard. So that'll be one story that makes people feel like, should I be using the water this way? Waukees story from last week, about 25% reduction request for all their folks using it. As I understand it today, a lot of that has to do with just more and more demand on their system, not necessarily lack of source waters, but the perception is still the same. So tomorrow morning with our contractor, I'm going to recommend that we postpone a week and see whether or not we get any additional flows coming down the Raccoon in particular. But if for some reason logistically that doesn't work, what I've heard from Waterworks is there's nothing in their recommendations that would keep us from getting going with that. We just would need to work against or help people understand why we would be moving forward, even though there's this broad perception that it's so dry. So my recommendation to my team is going to be let's hold for a week, but then make sure that that doesn't create a bunch of other negative externalities, including for our friends at Metro Waste, because they've been real good to us, holding a lot of material, and they're having to logistically deal with that while they wait for us to come in and start hauling it out.
You could get that probe in my backyard about 20 feet between cracks.
Oh, yeah. We've got
Terrible crawling there.
But the best news, even with all these changes, we have a group of residents who have really leaned in on this, who are really excited. They're excited about the science, but understanding what's going on in their soil. They're excited about getting better results. And they've been asking really great questions that have helped us further refine how we're getting into this next stage of the project. We appreciate that.
I'm excited about it too. I'm not excited about what my water bill is going to look like with all that sprinkling and all the watering we have to do prior and post SQR.
Right.
So something to consider.
Yeah, if we can take advantage of Mother Nature so we can stop some of that expense, that would be good. It works better if you've got soil that's a little more moisture content when you start. And once you've got the compost down, you do need to water it for 7 to 10 days to get it incorporated.
All right. Anything else for Pete? Recon.
Just short and sweet. Glad we got the belt back for Battle of the Verbs.
And just saying, I was the only one that ran that whole thing. So that's up in this group here. Just saying.
Well, I was there. I ran my mouth during the whole
Yes,
thing.
I'm
Let's
sure
put it
you
that
did.
way. It was good racing. Congratulations to Clive on that. It was really a nice turnout. This was I think the most well attended. I think that Mike had said that from Nick Mix. So I'm very glad to participate in that. Iowa State Fair is going on, which is obviously brings a lot of heads and beds to the greater Des Moines area. So from a development perspective with CVB and Catch Des Moines, we're always very excited about that. That's all I have.
Ted, did you
Yeah,
perhaps
thanks for
have
running your
something to
mouth
say?
there, Rare. That was great. Yeah, I do have a report here. So I did attend the SQR webinar. I don't know if I'm sure others probably did as well. Pete and Jeff from Polk County did a really good job on that. So on the Icon Water Trails, we're operationally, we're under budget. A lot of that is because the projects haven't kicked off yet. And so that's part of it. But from a budgetary standpoint, it is in good condition. The goal was to raise $33 million in private funds. To date, they've raised $29.7 million. So we're getting close, and we've got enough targets that are out there that they believe will easily hit that mark. Some of the potential investors are waiting on the results of the Destination Iowa grant from the state, which is another 10 million. And we should find out about that by the end of this month. Assuming we get that, then we know we've got some others locked in. And so we should easily get past that, that bogey of 33 million. And I,
Any concerns about inflated cost or with that?
yeah, obviously, the bid came in way higher than what we were originally expecting. I think the original estimate was around 48 million and came in over 76 million. So if you recall, we split the project up into 3 different components. The DOT or the federal DOT is allowing that to happen with the build grant. So basically, the staff has put together a 5-year capital project plan, kind of year by year, how much is going to be spent, what's being used through the build grant. So it's all very detailed at this point. It's all going to be reliant on the bid letting that's happening here, in the next couple months. And the first phase of the Scott Avenue dam mitigation, that's the big one, right? It was originally, so that phase of it is now 27 million for that first phase that would be done in April of 2023. But that's a reduction of $12 million for that phase based off of that we had the design team go back and redesign some stuff. So they were able to trim out some costs. And so again, we got a 5-year plan for what to do. We just got to get through that bid letting process. So that's Water Trails. It is moving forward, at least at this point financially, it's in pretty good shape. We've got a plan in place. We just got to get the bid letting to work, right?
Is there a hurry to let those bids? I mean, I'm seeing a softening, honestly. I mean, we just got a bid back for a $13 million project under budget.
Really?
Of ground, dirt moving, the cell we're building. And, we're still hearing, I'm hearing from some major dirt companies that folks are pulling back from huge jobs.
Yeah.
The Amazons and the Facebook are pulling back jobs. So
Yeah, I can believe that.
I know it's a gamble, but
it's kind of like the housing market, right? We're starting to see some softening there. So, so I mean, there are some time constraints around the different grants. The build grant has very specific time constraints that are built into it where it has to be done by and things of that nature. So, and it's kind of the pivot point, right? This first set for Scott Avenue. So we got to get that going in order to get the forward momentum for the rest of it. So, so that's the hope and the intent. MPO is kind of a slow time for MPO. I did just finish up the executive director review. I've been on the committee for the last 3 years for the executive director review. This year I was the chairman of that review committee. And so the MPO is in very good shape. Todd's got some challenges with his health and having to be remote 100% of the time. He basically hasn't left his house in over 2 years because he's just immune compromised. So he's got some real challenges there that we're trying to work through. But I was able to implement some of our processes here. So we now have a salary matrix at the MPO that we never had before that is mimics basically ours. There's a review process now for employees, and we are implementing a 360 review process for Todd. So none of that has been in place before, but we're now implementing that at the MPO. So anyways, that's it.
Good report. Again, I just wanted to echo my thanks for everyone that participated in Battle of the Burbs. Again, largest number of participants, over 500, and over 100 of those were Clive, which explains why we won the run. And maybe you'll include the stats do you have the numbers?
I've got Weaver's is 15-minute miles.
I was better than that. Thank you very much.
Anyway, in your email tomorrow,
that email that was sent.
and include the link to the photos.
The pictures of John in the belt are invaluable as well. So we need to put those on the website.
Let's go with the one with the whole.
You wearing it was just.
I don't have the girth. It wrapped around me several times.
Those were great.
So anyway, thank you all for participating, and Matt will include that.
Yeah, I'll share that.
The library just today got the book, The City We Make Together, City Council Meetings Primer for Participation. So I'll return that to the library in case any of you would like to.
Fine free now, though. You could keep it.
Suggest that.
Just saying.
Too soon.
Sorry, Richard.
But there are a lot of interesting things here as far as participation. So anyway, just want to make you aware of that. Susan.
Well, I tried to go to the Polk County Council of Watershed Management Authority meeting, but the address that had originally been sent out sent me in with the trucks dropping off everything at the landfill.
Oh, my.
So I backed out of there. And then I realized that they'd sent up a little update right before lunch, but I'd been busy and hadn't had a chance to see it. And I was too late by then to catch up with the tour. So I don't
Should've
know
just-
if you were
I
there.
was not there. I think, is that the one you went on, Doug?
You did? Okay, good. Well, anyway, I
You should have just
tried.
rolled in.
It really scared me.
It
I'm
is intimidating. It is scary. I agree.
You know, I'm the vice chair of the Polk County Homeless Coordinating Council, and I just want to update that the group has really looked at extreme weather situations and worked with Drake University to do a survey to find out what some of the answers might be. There's been, sounds like, a decision to not resurvey in the winter. We're just going to go with what they learned so far. There were multiple things of interest, but one thing that really surprised me was the people who basically said a reason they choose to not go into a shelter is that they feel it's dangerous to go there, that their personal belongings can end up being at risk. You know, some really depend on medications, and they, in certain places, don't have real careful arrangements, like you just have to give your first name to get your medication, and people figure that out and will go give the name and take that medication. It was eye-opening to me that, because I would think it would be more dangerous to be outside. Right. So anyway, it's been some good data to get in to try to encourage some improvements. So at least wanted to bring that up. And then as just a side note, today I was at the Iowa Association of Business and Industries Environmental Legislative Committee meeting. And an individual there from a concrete company was talking about the shortage of concrete. So this gets to your question about costs. And he said there just is not enough concrete, enough of a way to generate it out of the United States. They have to buy from Turkey and places like that, which really adds to the cost. And he said, you know, just be aware that with the infrastructure bill having passed, that is going to continue to put demands on concrete. So to the extent that is an element of the project for us, for streets or for DART or for others, that's likely to continue to be expensive, it seems.
Thank you, Susan. Michael?
Nothing for tonight.
Anything from legal counsel?
Nothing here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just one thing, Your Honor, is just a reminder for the next 2 weeks, or we ask a lot of you, as Doug mentioned with 86th Street, kind of digging in on some of these items with the strategic planning workshops upcoming. I also will be sending you some additional materials to take a look at as you head into strategic planning, and my update tomorrow related to financial components. So if I had to give you kind of a headline of the two big themes on Tuesday night, besides 86th Street, we'll start off with a financial overview and talk a little bit about what we see coming, as I've shared with you in the last budget process, and some deep dives specifically on public safety, police and fire. And so we're kind of going through a review of the major general fund departments, working with Liz and the departments to really dig in on that and present some things for you to think about, policy questions, related to those areas make up almost 50% of the general fund. And so my goal is to, over the next each year, is to kind of deep dive on 2 departments and start with the big ones in the general fund, knowing that we've got some financial challenges to work through over the next 2 to 3 years, particularly in the general fund. And so if I had to give you kind of the headline, those 2 topics are going to be big ones on Tuesday night to give you an update on, and then start to kind of work through some of the strategic decisions that will need to be made, as Doug obviously laid out a number of them for 86th Street. So I'll be sharing some of that with you for kind of your pre-read tomorrow, and then obviously Tuesday and Thursday, and then the follow-up the week and a half later on Saturday. So we know it's a lot of time, but it's a very important time for staff to get you, seek your direction on a number of key strategic items for this community, and we appreciate all the effort that goes into that. So we'll look forward to seeing you on Tuesday at the Education Center and the
Or the landfill, either one.
well, I wouldn't recommend that. Might be a longer drive to come from the landfill over to the MRF,
With the
but
MRF, right?
Or at the Murph Education Center.
so in
Yeah.
Grimes, so not far away.
We'll send a map so you all know
Yeah,
exactly where to
we'll
go.
be sharing a map of kind of where you go in to get into this area, so you don't go over the scale.
It is a little tricky to get to. It really, I mean,
It's where we did the ribbon cutting,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
Visor Lumber, you just keep
Yeah,
going
yeah.
down that road, and they've got good signage.
Yeah, that's easy.
we'll get some
Just
more.
don't go on the scale. Go past the scale to get to the
You
education
can,
center.
but we'll know what you weigh then. But
Yeah. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Well, thank you. Is there any further business? Seeing none, we will adjourn at 9:12.